Chapter 92. In the cold winter, the wine cup was steaming. The fragrance of Osman thus slowly spread in the building. The experienced drinkers nearby couldn't help but swallow their saliva and watch the rich child drink it. Yin Shu didn't expect that he would have such a good thing on the first day of his work. Although he had a high requirement for acting skills, he used to cheat in Nanjiang country. Later, he was caught by the government and then he joined the army as a cannon fodder. When the wine entered his throat, the imagined spiciness did not spread from his heart. Instead, it was replaced by a soft sweetness. The taste was smooth, as if it was silk instead of wine. The strong fragrance of Osman thus penetrated into his limbs and bones. The pores all over his body seemed to open, and he felt extremely comfortable. It's not wine. It's clearly an addictive poison. Yin Shu drank a cup and was a little drunk. At this moment, he had forgotten that he was still acting. He picked up an Osman thus cake and stuffed it into his mouth without caring about his image. His whole mouth was immediately wrapped by a completely different sweetness. He chewed it carefully. It was soft and oily, sweet but not greasy. The fragrance of rice was wrapped in the fragrance of Osman thus. The deliciousness was clearly layered. The sweetness was mixed with the freshness, which was memorable. Yin Shu was totally intoxicated. He didn't need any pretentious performance. His expression had already explained everything. Many people couldn't help but order. They wanted to know why Yin Shu became like that just after drinking a cup of wine and eating a piece of Osman thus cake. As pots of Osman thus wine were served on the table, the fragrance of Osman thus in the entire winery was more intense. The real good wine never needed any publicity. After tasting the first sip, those old drunkards were immediately ecstatic, as if they got the most precious treasure. After drinking one by one, they excitedly walked out of the restaurant. Obviously, they went to show off to their drinking friends. Yin Shuetong could imagine how lively the Linli building would be tomorrow. It's delicious. I want to drink more, Yin Shu shouted with a red face. Obviously, he forgot his identity. Yin Shuetong shook her head and quickly asked someone to help him out. She couldn't help but smile slightly. For the sake that he successfully opened up the situation of the Linli building, she didn't blame him for drinking indiscriminately. The Osman thus wine alone is enough to make the Linli building famous in the Qinghe town. But the dishes are a little monotonous. I don't know if Mr. Li has other ideas. At night, the Lantern Festival was bustling with noise and excitement. People could smell the faint fragrance of Osman thus in the streets close to the Linli building. More and more people came because of the smell, which made the peddlers on the street happy. Su Li stood on the roof and looked at the lively scene downstairs. A smile flashed on her calm face. Yin Shuetong's ability was good. She didn't need to worry about the Linli building at ordinary times, which was a surprise. However, she looked towards the south of Qinghe city. In a few more days, some people with ulterior motives would make a move. On the second day, the number of drinkers who came to the Linli building to taste the wine was more than twice that of yesterday. The waiters kept serving them. Soon, the second floor of the winery was full. The faces of the customers who came yesterday changed slightly when they saw the sign on the wall. They seemed to have forgotten something very important. Osman thus wine, 10 taels per pot. Osman thus cake, 5 taels per plate. That's right. Yesterday, the shopkeeper said that drinks would be sold at a 10% discount on the first day of business. Today, the original price has been restored. What's going on? Old Li, 10 taels a pot. It's enough for me to go to Laifu Inn to drink 10 bottles of bamboo wine. Old Li, I came here because of your bragging. I didn't expect that you cheated me. Tell me, how much did you charge the winery? We treat you as a friend. How can you treat us like this? For a time, the voices of criticism were constantly in the building. Many people like Old Li were extremely angry. Anyone who brought friends to share good things with good intentions was misunderstood. He would never feel good. But the more it was so, the more Old Li wanted to prove that he was right. Are you kidding me? Am I that kind of person? Old Li looked angry. He waved his hand and said, Waiter, give me 3 pots of Osman thus wine. Today, I will show you what real wine is. The bamboo wine of Laifu Inn is bullshit. Compared with the Osmanthus wine of the Leanly building, it can't even be called wine. Looking at the angry face of his old friend, many drinkers who were about to leave suddenly stopped and turned back to sit down again. Well, old Lee, I will taste the magical Osmanthus wine that you said. It makes you praise it so much. As early as in the yard, Haydn brewed a large number of Osmanthus wine. After the original wine was diluted, it could be directly served on the table. It was very fast. Before old Lee and others waited for a long time, the waiter put 3 pots of hot wine on the table and a plate of Osmanthus cake. Old Lee was stunned and said hurriedly, "Wait, I didn't order Osmanthus cake." The waiter immediately smiled and said, "Our master said that you are a person who loves wine. This plate of Osmanthus cake is a bonus." Old Lee's eyes were wet when he heard that. Looking at the plate of Osmanthus cake, he felt that he was about to cry. "Thank your shopkeeper for me." The waiter didn't correct the difference between shopkeeper and master. He nodded and went away. Su Li stood on the top floor and watched this scene. Her smile was full of deep meaning. When a person was doubted and denied, even if he was only given a small favor, he would remember it deeply and immediately regard the person who gave the gift as a confidant. Sure enough, people's hearts were so fragile. For people who loved wine, the power of wine had no upper limit. When a group of old drunkards drank the Osmanthus wine, yesterday's scene immediately repeated, and it was even crazier. "Old Lee, I was wrong. This wine should only be available in heaven. How can we smell it in the human world? Old Lee, you hurt me. After I drank the Osmanthus wine, I thought of the green bamboo wine. I didn't know how to drink it. It's really not expensive to sell such sweet wine for 10 taels of silver for a pot. Ah, Leanly building, I want to live here. I still like the spicy taste. I hope that the Leanly building can produce new wine as soon as possible. Waiter, pack 2 more plates of Osmanthus cake. I want to take them back to my wife to taste." For a time, the restaurant was constantly praised and set off a buying frenzy. In just half a day, hundreds of pots of Osmanthus wine and thousands of plates of Osmanthus cake were sold. Yin Shuatong was so scared that she hurriedly announced that today's inventory was insufficient and the restaurant would be opened tomorrow. Although the inventory of the winery was sufficient, and the dried Osmanthus flour was also collected in several warehouses last autumn, it couldn't stand such a crazy buying. Moreover, she also knew that there must be speculators among the customers. Otherwise, no matter how good the reputation of the winery was, it could not sell so much in just one day. However, I still need to tell Su Li about it. Thinking of this, Yin Shuatong went to the attic on the top floor. Before she knocked on the door, she heard a voice coming from inside. "I already know the specific things. In the future, the Osmanthus wine and Osmanthus cake will be limited and can't be bought in large quantities. The specific quantity is up to you." Yin Shuatong was shocked, and then her scalp was slightly numb. It turned out that the current situation of the winery had been seen by her, but she didn't say it clearly. If she didn't come today, would the shopkeeper be changed tomorrow? "Yes, I see." Yin Shuatong didn't open the door. She obediently said outside the door and turned to go downstairs. At the same time, she secretly decided to do better than before. That night, in the underground adytum, Chu Qingning, Yin Shuatong, Fang Yuan and Fang Mu gathered together. "Shuatong, tell me how much money the winery has made these days." Chu Qingning's eyes were shining, and he looked like a miser. Yin Shuatong rolled her eyes at him and said slowly, "The Osmanthus wine we are selling now is diluted 100 times. The net profit is 9 taels per pot. The profit of Osmanthus cake is a little lower, about 3 taels per plate. Today, we have sold more than 500 pots of Osmanthus wine and more than 1,200 plates of Osmanthus cake. Excluding the odd amount, the Leanly building has made at least 8,000 taels." Thinking of this, Yin Shuatong couldn't help but take a deep breath. The profit of Osmanthus wine was terrible. Moreover, wine was not like dishes. Even if people drank it all the time, they wouldn't get tired of it. People who liked to drink even needed to make a little wine every day to feel happy. Unlike dishes, if people ate it every day, they would get tired of it. In this way, as soon as the Leanly building opened, It became a money tree that made 8,000 taels a day? Fang Mu's eyes were wide open, and he couldn't help drooling. It turned out that the eldest brother had such a powerful backer. No wonder his cultivation rose sharply. He reached the acquired 8th hurdle in less than half a year. It was much faster than in the family. Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning had no reaction. They had already seen Su Li's ability to make money, so they were not surprised by the money. Su Li didn't spend a penny before, and she extorted 400,000 taels from Su Huanli. Then, the Linli building was established. Compared with that, the daily income of 8,000 taels was a piece of cake. How does Su Li think? She not only cooks delicious dishes, but also brews wine so well. Chu Qingning smiled and couldn't help but pat Fang Yuan's back. He said, "In this way, we won't suffer any loss if we follow her." Fang Yuan rolled his eyes. Yin Xuetong and Fang Mu were both confused. What loss? What riddles were they talking about? At this moment, in the study of a magnificent mansion in the south city of the Qinghe town. "Master, many of the restaurants you chose have agreed to transfer." The middle-aged man who looked like a steward bowed and said respectfully. Beside the desk in front of him, a handsome young man with a cold expression and dressed in luxurious golden clothes was staring fixedly at the ancient scroll in his hand. From the back of his hand, one could vaguely discern that this was a cultivation technique illustration. Hearing the housekeeper's words, the young man snorted and said slowly, "Tell me, which restaurants are there?" The housekeeper quickly replied, "There are 3 in total. One is the Lai Fu Inn in the center of the city. The owner of this inn is not famous, so he naturally dares not to offend you, master. The other 2 are the Yulai Inn in the east of the city and the Huomen Inn in the west of the city. These 2 are old inns that have been operating for many years. Their locations are a little remote, but they are good places with stable traffic." The young man nodded slightly and seemed to be satisfied. He looked up and asked, "Then, how about the income of the inn?" "The Lai Fu Inn is the highest. It can earn 3,000 taels every day." The housekeeper answered fluently, "The other 2 are 2,500 taels and 2,700 taels respectively." The young man frowned slightly. He put down the scroll in his hand and stood up slowly. His eyes were as cold as lightning. "You have inquired for so long, but you only found 3 rubbish restaurants for me." The housekeeper was suddenly shocked and knelt down. "Master, I have tried my best. The other restaurants and inns are supported by the rich and powerful families like us. They are supported by senior officials. We really can't afford to offend them." The young man sneered, "I promised my father that since I want to have achievements in business, I can't do it on a small scale. The 3 inns you mentioned don't even have the ability to earn 5,000 taels a day. How can they match my identity?" Chapter 93. "Oh." The young man raised his eyebrows and showed a look of interest. "What is that place?" "On the second-class street in the east of the city, there is a Linli building. It sells the best wine, Osmanthus wine. It has been overcrowded for only 2 days since it opened." The butler kept bragging for fear that the young man was dissatisfied, "But I haven't found out the background behind it yet. I only know that a person named Mr. Li went to the broker house to select people a few days ago. Now those people have become waiters of the Linli building." The young man was more interested. "It is interesting that it can earn 7,000 taels in 2 days since it opened. I have never heard of Mr. Li. He is a secretive person and probably doesn't have great skills. You can go to receive the reward. Tomorrow, go to see the supervisor of the Linli building. If they don't agree, do you know what to do?" The butler was overjoyed and immediately knelt and kowtowed. "Thank you, master. I know. The next day, Su Li came to the Qinghe girls' school in casual clothes. Today was the first day of school and it was very lively. "Lecturer Su is here." "Haha, Lecturer Su." Lecturers passing by saw Su Li and greeted her very cordially. They all knew that Su Li not only became the special class lecturer of the Qinghe girls' school but also the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop in the Qinghe town. It could be said that she perfectly inherited the 2 identities of Gong Xiangjuan and became the person whose status was second only to Satrap Yang in the Qinghe town. Su Li obtained such a high achievement at such a young age. The halo on her was so dazzling that it almost blinded others. Back to the courtyard of the school, Mammy Li had nothing to do. During this time, Xiaowu and Su Li lived here and cleaned every day. The floor in the room was so clean that it could almost reflect people's figures. Mammy Li quickly went to cook. Seeing that Su Li built a winery that was more profitable than the Baiwei building, she was completely at ease. Su Li looked at the back of Mammy Li and a ray of light flashed in her eyes. She wanted to ask why Mammy Li was so familiar with the Qinghe girls' school. But if she asked directly, Mammy Li might not answer. Although the relationship between them was tight enough, it did not include confessing the secrets that were difficult to say to each other in the past. It seems that I have to find a way to test it. Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly. She would never let the hidden danger stay by her side. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Su Li changed into the costume of Mr. Li and passed through the high walls of the School of Liberal Arts and the School of Martial Arts like a wisp of smoke. Then she came to the martial arts field. Looking at the empty arena, she picked up the bow on the table and pulled the bowstring under the dim moonlight. Her right eye squinted as she pulled the bowstring to the fullest. His fingers loosened. Clang! An arrow streaked across the night sky like a bolt of lightning, directly piercing through the bullseye and nailing itself firmly to the ground. The tail of the arrow was still trembling. Su Li changed to a stronger bow and took a deep breath. For the next part of the plan, it was time for her archery and swordsmanship to be practiced again. While Su Li was practicing her bow, Fang Yuan and others gathered together in the underground adytum of the Linli building and frowned. Did you find out? What is the background of the man who claimed to be the butler of the Jin family? Fang Yuan looked at Chu Qingning. Chu Qingning looked a little embarrassed and said, I went to the Tianya house and inquired about it. It is the Jin family in the Qinghe town. At least 5 people in the family are officials in the imperial court. Recently, the first master of the family has been looking for a restaurant to bribe. It is said that this is a task given by his father. If he succeeds, he will be the next successor of the Jin family. We've hit the muzzle of a gun. As soon as they heard the background of the Jin family, Yin Xuetong and Fang Mu changed their faces slightly. Even Fang Yuan frowned unconsciously and said, the Jin family has some background. Contact Su Li. We can't make the decision. Then, Fang Yuan immediately got up and walked out. He soon disappeared outside the door. Yin Xuetong asked curiously, isn't Su Li in the restaurant? Where else will she go except here? Chu Qingning scratched his head and said, she will go to the Qinghe girls' school. Go to school? There was a trace of envy in Yin Xuetong's eyes. She also wanted to go further in talent and learning, but she was not qualified now. At this time, Chu Qingning laughed and said, how can she go to school? She goes to class. Although she looks like a profiteer, she is the special class lecturer of the Qinghe girls' school. Besides, she is also the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop. Her status is comparable to that of the satrap. Tut-tut. Yin Xuetong opened her mouth slightly in surprise. Her beautiful eyes were shining. Gradually, there was something called worship. Su Li was so powerful. Did she have such a high status? Chu Qingning said with a sneaky expression. He whispered, I told you secretly. Don't tell others. The relationship between Su Li and the winery has not been exposed. If Su Li knows that I told you, she will definitely skin me. Yin Xuetong nodded repeatedly and there was a little fear in her eyes. She was afraid that Chu Qingning would be skinned by Su Li. Fang Mu was speechless. Brother Chu's temperament didn't change at all. He was more daring than the sky. Aren't you afraid of being driven out of the Linli building if you talk about your master like this? Tonight was destined to be a sleepless night. The sky gradually turned white. Su Li put down the bow and arrow and quickly destroyed the traces of her coming. When she returned to the courtyard, she suddenly noticed that there was someone in the room. But she soon relaxed. The newcomer was obviously Fang Yuan. Opening the door, Su Li sat down and poured herself a cup of tea. Fang Yuan flashed out from behind the bed. There was a rare trace of anger in his eyes. Where have you been? I have been waiting for you here all night. Su Li seemed to be startled by the voice. She turned around and saw Fang Yuan. Her eyes flashed with anger. She said, "Fang Yuan, why are you hiding here instead of in the winery?" Fang Yuan felt a little sorry in his heart, but it was soon covered by anger. He said, "Where have you been? Do you know that I am worried about you?" The last sentence came from Fang Yuan's heart. Su Li looked at Fang Yuan and suddenly smiled. She said, "Don't forget that only the master can limit the freedom of the servant. You are working for me now. Do you want to limit my actions?" Fang Yuan's eyes darkened. He completely calmed down and whispered, "Of course not." "That's good." Su Li poured a cup of tea for Fang Yuan and didn't mean to explain her whereabouts. She said, "Tell me, why are you looking for me?" Fang Yuan picked up the teacup, and a wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Falling flowers yearn for love, heartless brook. He finally understood the meaning of this sentence. Then, Fang Yuan told Su Li what the Jin family found. Su Li was surprised. She had been waiting for the embroidery workshop to make trouble, but she didn't expect that the winery was the first one to make trouble. Jin family, all kinds of scenes appeared in Su Li's mind, and her eyes became darker. She took the special paper of the winery and quickly wrote a letter and gave it to Fang Yuan. "Hand this letter to County Governor Manor." Fang Yuan took the letter, but Yang Zai's face appeared in his mind unconsciously. Should I look for him for help? But they had no friendship with Yang Zai, so why would he help them? Fang Yuan couldn't figure out Su Li's intention, but he still took the envelope and left. He had absolute confidence in Su Li's scheme. What was written in the letter was definitely not asking for help. The next day, the butler of the Jin family came again. Yin Xuetong refused with the excuse of asking for the master, but she was very uneasy. She always felt that the butler would take action soon. Although it was just intuition, Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning still arranged Haydn and others to guard around the Linli building, and they guarded one side respectively. It was dark and windy at night. The servants in the Linli building soon fell asleep. Fang Yuan was in the dark, holding a sword in his hand and leaning against the wall to sleep. Soon, a slight sound of breaking through the air sounded. He suddenly opened his eyes and rushed to the corner of the second floor like a civet. In the faint night light, Fang Yuan clearly saw a dozen black shadows quietly cut the door of the Linli building and then rushed in. Sure enough, they come. Fang Yuan smiled coldly and waved his right hand gently. Chu Qingning immediately understood and let people hiding in every corner of the building ignite the sleeping smoke. The sleeping smoke spread very fast. Before long, there was a sound of a dozen heavy objects falling in the building. Haydn and others who had already taken the antidote showed a wretched smile. They immediately extinguished the sleeping incense and dragged a dozen men in black into the underground adytum. They tied them up and locked them up. After opening the window to ventilate, the smell of sleeping incense dissipated. Chu Qingning shook his head and said, "The sleeping incense is really good. The Jin family is also a famous and distinguished family. How can they even do such dirty things?" Fang Yuan was expressionless and said coldly, "The more powerful a family is, the more dirty things it will do. You and I have met a lot of dirty things." Chu Qingning suddenly became speechless and sullen. Fang Yuan was like eating gunpowder in the past 2 days. He often choked people. Chu Qingning didn't know why he was angry. Forget it. As a married man, I don't care about him. Thinking that Yin Xuetong was still waiting for him in the room, Chu Qingning smiled. He didn't bother to interrogate the men in black and left in a hurry. Fang Yuan came to the underground adytum alone and lifted the masks of the men in black one by one. As expected, they were all servants of the Jin family. The intelligence system of the Tianya house was very terrifying. Even the means that the Jin family used to deal with the 3 families were clear. Because they got the news in advance, they could be prepared. Hierarch of the Enmore cult, young master, Fang Yuan muttered to himself. His eyes were darker. He looked at the dozens of people who were tied up in the room, and his face showed a ruthless expression. For a day and a night, the dull screams were mixed with despair. However, the ground was full of guests and it was very lively. The butler of the Jin family waited in the room with a gloomy face. He felt more and more uneasy. The people he sent yesterday were like hitting a dog with a meat bun. None of them came back. It was really weird. Is there any force behind the Leanly building? The butler looked at the portrait sent by a special person. There were only two faces in the portrait. One was Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning, and the other was a man in a bamboo hat without a face. The butler looked at it for a long time. The more he looked, the angrier he was. He almost tore the drawing. Damn it. Even the Tianyao house didn't record these two faces. It was very likely that they were disguised faces. How could he investigate it? If it doesn't work, I can only let the master make the decision. Although the butler was extremely angry, he was not flustered. In his eyes, there was nothing that could baffle the master. After all, the master was the peerless genius who won the first place in the martial arts competition in the Qinghe province. Even Satrap Yang said that the master would definitely become the mainstay of the Dahan country. How could such a master be baffled by a sneaky Mr. Li? It was a joke. On the other side, Yin Shu forced himself to calm down. He took a letter to the satrap's mansion. Looking at the majestic and towering lintel, Yin Shu had mixed feelings. He was slightly dull for a moment. As a foreign prisoner of war, he could enter the satrap's mansion one day. Stop. What are you doing? The guard of the satrap's mansion saw Yin Shu's furtive behavior and immediately came up to ask. Yin Shu looked serious. He didn't lose face for the Leanly building. He said in a calm tone, I am from the Leanly building. My master has a letter and wants the third child of the Yang family to read it in person. The Leanly building? The guard's expression changed slightly. As a new force rising in the Qinghe town, the name of the winery had been known by many people in the Qinghe town. Naturally, they had heard of it. And it was said that the third child of the Yang family had met the boss of the Leanly building once. Thinking of this, the guard relaxed and said, Wait a moment. I will go in and report. Chapter 94. A letter from Mr. Li. In the study, Yang Zai received the notice and felt confused. He couldn't help but think of the mysterious woman who was calm all the time in the prisoner camp. Let him come in. Yang Zai waved his hand. He didn't have a close relationship with Mr. Li. The letter came suddenly. He also wanted to know what the woman was going to do. After a while, Yin Shu walked into the study and saw Yang Zai. He couldn't help but be shocked. Wasn't this the lieutenant general that he met in the prisoner camp that day? Yang Zai only felt that the person was familiar. After thinking for a while, he remembered that he was one of the prisoners that Mr. Li brought back. He didn't expect that after half a month, the spirit of this person was completely different. He didn't have the breath of a prisoner camp. Mr. Li's means of training people are really superb, Yang Zai couldn't help but praise. Yin Shu was annoyed and couldn't help but refute, Master, you are wrong. We didn't receive any training in the Leanly building. Everything is voluntary. As Mr. Li taught us, if we want to change our fate, we can only rely on ourselves. Mr. Li just gave us a chance. Before he finished his words, the maid standing beside Yang Zai immediately scolded him, How dare you? You are just a servant who delivers a letter. How can you speak here? Kneel down and apologize for your mistake. Yin Shu's eyelids trembled. There was a little fear in his eyes, but he didn't kneel down. Instead, he looked at the maid who scolded him angrily. He didn't avoid her eyes and even looked stubborn. The maid was immediately annoyed. When she was about to call someone, Yang Zai waved his hand and said with a smile, Ling, you can leave. Master. The maid felt wronged and couldn't help but stamp her feet. But in the end, she didn't dare to disobey Yang Zai and left with hatred. Yin Shu also felt bad. If Yang Zai didn't speak, he was likely to be driven out by the Yang family and even beaten. But even if he knew the result, he didn't want to lose his self-esteem. Yang Zai looked at Yin Shu with appreciation. Although in his opinion, Yin Shu's impulse was worthless, not everyone had such courage. There were only two people left in the room. Yin Shu remembered the business and quickly put the unwrinkled envelope gently on the table. Yang Zai took it and opened it. There was only a thin piece of letter paper with only one line of words in it. Child Yang, the Leanly building still remembers the help of the prisoner camp. Can you come to the Leanly building tomorrow night and drink Osman thus wine with me? It was just an invitation. Yang Zai was puzzled and felt that Mr. Li was more unpredictable. However, he had nothing to do now. The Leanly building was not a dangerous place. It was better to go and have a look. Thinking of this, Yang Zai nodded slightly and said with a smile, "Your name is Yin Shu, right?" Leanly Yin said. Child Yang nodded and said. Receiving a reply, Yin Shu's face lit up with joy. He quickly lowered his body and nodded, "My master will be waiting for you tomorrow." Seeing Yin Shu leave, Yang Zai was a little envious. The new servant of Mr. Li could be so clever. Why didn't he have any talented people around him? Yang suddenly, Tishu Ti Yang Li Yang for 2 days in a row, the Leanly building was peaceful and there was no accident. Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning both sensed something unusual. The Jin family was in the dark, and they were in the light. The situation was not good for them. When Su Li got the news, her eyes flashed and she didn't say anything. Fang Yuan didn't ask more consciously. That night, Yang Zai came to the Leanly building alone in casual clothes. He was immediately welcomed to the top floor. The Leanly building was like a tower. There was only one room on the top floor. It was spacious, but the layout was much more chic and elegant than that downstairs. Yang Zai stood outside the door and looked at Su Li, who stood by the window with her back to him. He couldn't help but say with a smile, "Mr. Li is really in a good mood. It must be a special feeling to appreciate the moon on the top floor. But the Lantern Festival has passed. Today's moon is new." Su Li turned around. She didn't wear a bamboo hat, but a veil. Her black hair was in a bun with a green hairpin. It complemented the simple decoration in the room. She was extremely fresh. "Child Yang, you are really punctual." After praising him, Su Li chuckled under the veil. She walked lightly and sat opposite to Yang Zai. Then she poured a cup of Osman thus wine for him. Yang Zai smiled slightly and took a sip. His eyes suddenly brightened. He sighed and said, "I have practiced martial arts since I was a child. I am not a greedy person. I have drunk a lot of wine, but none of them is as gentle as the wine brewed by Mr. Li. It is like a beautiful woman in the water town of the south of the Yangtze River." "Child, you must be joking. Speaking of wine, you are much better than those who claim to be immortals in wine." Su Li smiled lightly and said, "However, Child Yang doesn't hesitate at all. Aren't you afraid that I will poison the wine?" Yang Zai's smile froze. He slowly put down the wine cup in his hand, but he didn't panic. Instead, he said calmly, "What do you mean? Is it possible that someone dares to poison me in the Qinghe town?" Su Li picked up the flagon and poured herself a cup. Her tone gradually became ethereal. "Child, you are wrong again. Whether you dare or not is different from whether you are willing or not. At least for me, if I want you to die, I can do it without any trace. Even if Satrap Yang knows it, he can do nothing about it." Yang Zai's left hand hidden under the table trembled slightly. He looked more and more uneasy. It seemed that a cold breath rose from the soles of his feet and went straight to the top of his head. Mr. Li was not a good person. He felt a little regret in his heart. One could know a person's face but not his heart. Moreover, he didn't even see Mr. Li's true face. If he knew it, he wouldn't be so arrogant and come alone. At this time, Su Li chuckled and said, "However, Child Yang, don't worry. Since I invited you to taste wine, I will not harm you. Not only would he not harm you, he would even protect you. With young master's intelligence and wisdom, you should be able to figure this out, right?" Yang Zai was suddenly enlightened when Su Li pointed out the stakes. Yes, the Leanly building invited him above board. If they really poisoned him, the Leanly building would be destroyed early. It would only bring disaster to the Leanly building early. For the sake of the Leanly building, Mr. Li naturally wanted to protect him. After figuring it out, Yang Zai didn't feel relaxed. Instead, there was a layer of cold sweat on his forehead. The rhythm of the conversation was completely controlled by the mysterious woman. His thoughts were simply swayed by her. It was not his turn to make decisions. Su Li shook the clear wine in her hand and said lightly, "Child Yang, don't be nervous. Today, I invite you to taste wine. Of course, there are other things. Child, please look down the stairs. Hearing that Su Li talked about business, Yang Zai immediately felt relaxed. He stood up and held the stairs to look down to the first floor. He saw a middle-aged man in a black silk robe sitting downstairs with an arrogant face. But it was too noisy in the building, so he couldn't hear what he was talking about. Isn't he the butler of the Jin family? Yang Zai recognized the middle-aged man at a glance. He was surprised and immediately remembered the latest information given to him in the mansion. He suddenly understood. It turned out that the Linli building was targeted by the Jin family. Mr. Li looked for him because he had something to ask. Yang Zai made up his mind and immediately became calm. It seemed that he took the initiative. He turned around and said bitterly, "The Jin family repeatedly destroyed the industry of the Qinghe town. It's really hateful. But the Jin family has a deep background. Even my father may not be able to stop them from plotting against Mr. Li's winery. Mr. Li, I'm afraid that you are asking the wrong person this time." When he said this, Yang Zai raised his head, only to be met with a pair of pitch-black eyes that seemed to be smiling yet not smiling. There was a faint trace of mockery in them. The deep darkness was like a boundless hell, causing one to involuntarily sink into it. Yang Zai's heart thumped and he couldn't help but step back. It seemed that things were not as he thought. "Child, are you kidding?" Su Li put down the wine cup and leaned lazily on the back of the chair. She said, "When did I say that? Do I ask you to help me this time?" "No." Yang Zai was confused. Then why did she ask him to look at the first floor? The Linli building is a place for business. I ask you to come here because I have a deal to talk about. Su Li's eyes became soft like a peerless enchantress. She said, "Are you interested?" Yang Zai frowned and sat down again. "What's there to talk about between you and me?" Mr. Li didn't have what he wanted. He couldn't do what Mr. Li asked. Yang Zai felt that Su Li's deal had failed before she said it. But Su Li looked confident and said, "Of course, there are many things. For example, your sister always wants to be a general and your dream in your heart. If you don't mind, I can help you realize it. But what you have to pay is actually very little." Hearing this, Yang Zai's face finally changed dramatically and his expression was full of horror. Who on earth was Mr. Li? How did he know about his family matters and even guess what he was thinking? It was impossible. Yang Zai didn't believe it at all. Su Li gently took a sip of the sweet wine, and there was a vague recollection in her eyes. In the previous life, someone wrote a biography for Yang Hongxiu, but it was not a glorious history. She was remembered as the wife of Jin Cheng'ao, the first child of the Jin family. Her tragic life was blocked by the Jin family, but the biography circulating in the martial arts circle couldn't be blocked by the Jin family. Su Li had read it carefully in the previous life. After all, she was also from the Qinghe province. Naturally, she was interested in the people in the Qinghe province. The person who wrote the biography obviously knew Yang Hongxiu very well. It described in detail the agreement between Yang Hongxiu and her father at home when she was a child. The third brother, who had the closest relationship with her, was also mentioned repeatedly. The most mentioned was that Yang Zai yearned for freedom and was extremely eager to be a free chivalrous man in the martial arts circle. But it was almost impossible for Yang Zai, who was from an official family, to realize his dream. Child's dream is a taboo. Your origin is destined to make what you want become an extravagant hope. But it is not difficult for me to solve it. Su Li said obscurely, but Yang Zai understood. He suddenly fell into a deep silence. After a long time, he smiled bitterly and said, "Don't joke, Mr. Li. The trajectory of my life has been fixed. There is no need to struggle." At this moment, Yang Zai completely removed his disguise and all his thoughts were written on his face. He had no secrets in front of Su Li. "Oh? Really?" Su Li tilted her head and supported half of her cheek with her right hand. She said softly, "I said, it is not difficult. If you don't believe it, you can let your sister have a try. The agreement between the fourth sister and my father?" Yang Zai took a deep breath and shook his head. "That is even more impossible. To be honest, even my father can't pull the bow that my father gave to my sister. My father is not only the satrap but also the first senior in the Qinghe town. It is said that only the legendary. Chapter 95. In front of Yang Zai, there was a cup of wine standing in the air, as if it was held by an invisible hand. Such a strange scene made Yang Zai's mouth dry. He hesitated to say the first half of the sentence. Only the inborn senior can pull it away. Su Li chuckled and then opened her palm. The wine cup hanging in the air was immediately pulled back to Su Li's hand. As for the legendary Xiantian stage, the most obvious sign is telekinesis. Child Yang, am I right? Su Li's low and magnetic voice rang in his ears. Yang Zai felt cold all over. He looked straight ahead and couldn't make any expression on his face. This woman, who seemed to be in her 20s, turned out to be an inborn senior. The legendary inborn senior who could fight against tens of thousands of troops by himself. His mind exploded and turned blank. From childhood, he constantly heard rumors about the inborn senior. He didn't expect that he would meet one so easily today. And he even wanted to make trouble for her before. Yang Zai's heart was in turmoil. Countless thoughts came to his mind in an instant. The Jin family even wanted to make trouble for the inborn senior. It was as if the god of longevity had hung himself. He was tired of living. I always don't like killing. So, even if the Jin family makes things difficult for me and even secretly sends warriors here, I just accept all the orders and don't fight back. But it doesn't mean that I'm not angry. Do you know, third child Yang? Su Li's words were no longer soft. With the momentum of the inborn realm, it was full of pressure. Yang Zai's back was instantly wet. He immediately nodded to show that he understood. That's good. However, considering the current situation of the Yang family, it's too much to ask you to deal with the Jin family. I'm not an unreasonable person. So, I will make a deal with your sister. Can you promise me? Yang Zai was happy and blurted out, it's an honor for my sister to be Mr. Li's apprentice. What's the deal? I'd like to hear the details. Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly and moved her lips. Yang Zai nodded again and again. An hour later, Yang Zai left from the back door of the Linli building. Before he could take a breath, he hurried back to the mansion and found his sister who was still practicing the bow in the martial arts field. Hongxiu. Yang Hongxiu heard the familiar voice and immediately turned back in surprise. She shouted happily, "Third brother, where have you been? I haven't seen you all night." Yang Hongxiu said and walked closer. Then she saw that Yang Zai was sweating as if he was fished out of the water. She suddenly froze. It seemed that she hadn't seen her third brother in such a mess for a long time. Yang Zai looked around and saw that no one was around. He immediately whispered, "Hongxiu, what I'm going to say next is a secret. You must not reveal this to anyone, including father, mother, and Huan Er. I've found you a master who can teach you archery." After that, Yang Zai left in a hurry, leaving Yang Hongxiu, who was confused, muttering to herself, "What master? Aren't there many masters who practice archery at home?" Third brother is acting strange today. After Yang Zai left the Linli building, there was chaos in the hall on the first floor. Go back and tell Jin Chengao. Don't think that you can do whatever you want just because someone in your family is an official in the imperial court. Our Jin family doesn't buy it. Yin Xuetong looked angry. Her delicate rebuke made the entire winery quiet, and all the guests who were drinking were stunned. Kim family? Which Kim family? Is there any Kim family in the Qinghe town? Of course, it's that Kim family. Some people couldn't help but whisper. Tut tut, the Kim family is really unscrupulous. They want to take advantage of everything. Do they really think that they are the local tyrants in the Qinghe town? Hush. Be quiet. Don't talk nonsense. Be careful of your life. However, the Linli building is targeted by the Kim family. I'm afraid that it will be dangerous. This winery seems to have no background. Hearing the discussions around him, Butler Jin's face was livid. Since he became the chief butler of the Jin family, he had never been so humiliated. It was a great shame. How dare the Linli building offend them? Butler Jin pointed at Yin Xuetong, who was about to cry. It seemed that it was a trick of a bully to bully a weak girl. Many drinkers couldn't stand it. Immediately, a tall and strong man stood up and said in a rough voice, "Old bastard, what are you doing? Get out of here. If you don't care, I'll beat you to death." Someone took the lead, and immediately a group of people who were drunk stood up and jeered, "Yes, I don't like your Jin family for a long time. Get out of here. Don't get out. Beat them to death." Laro Lee, whose face was red, picked up the stool and threw it at them. Crack. Butler Jin dodged awkwardly. The stool fell to the ground and made a crisp sound. But it was like a fuse, which aroused the ferocity of the drunkards. "Go up and beat them. Ah, go up. Those who are afraid of death are idiots." The scene suddenly became chaotic. The tables and chairs were mixed with drinks and pastries. Yin Xuetong didn't expect that the effect was so good. She quickly took people to hide in the back hall and let the people in the front hall fight. Hearing the screams coming from outside from time to time, Yin Xuetong couldn't help but smile. There was a saying that the law couldn't punish the masses. Butler Jin was beaten for nothing today, but the Jin family would definitely blame it on them. What should they do? "I learned another trick from Su Li. It's so cool." Chu Qingning smiled and rubbed Yin Xuetong's soft hair. He said, "Don't think about it. Since Su Li asked us to do this, she must have other tricks. Let's do it." Yin Xuetong answered softly. Then she hesitated and whispered, "Su Li is so powerful and beautiful. Will you?" Chu Qingning was stunned and immediately showed an extremely frightened expression. He rubbed Yin Xuetong's chubby face and scolded her with a smile, "Little girl, what are you thinking about? Su Li is such a tigress. I can't afford to provoke her. Only Fang Yuan, the masochist." Yin Xuetong held back her laughter and pointed behind Chu Qingning. Chu Qingning seemed to feel something and couldn't help but look back. Suddenly, he saw Su Li and Fang Yuan standing by the door. He didn't know how long they had been listening. Chu Qingning was immediately scared to death. "Ah, Xuetong, you are also bad. You even hurt me." With the screams of Chu Qingning and Butler Jin, there was a burst of laughter in the back hall. After the chaos, Butler Jin was beaten black and blue and fled awkwardly. The drinkers gradually sobered up and immediately realized what a stupid thing they had done. They slipped away at the same time. Before leaving, they did not forget to leave money for the drinks. Yin Shu and the others felt great when they saw this. They had long disliked Butler Jin. They had thought that the Leanly building would definitely be humble or compromise with the Jin family. They were still worried about their situation. They did not expect that the attitude of the superior was so resolute. "I hope Mr. Li and others can make it." Yin Shu and others prayed secretly. When the winery was in trouble, their cohesion immediately improved significantly. On the top floor, Su Li stood on the edge of the stairs. Chu Qingning and Fang Yuan, who were beaten into a panda's face, stood behind her. They were all speechless. "What are you going to do next?" Fang Yuan couldn't help but ask. In this way, they undoubtedly offended the Jin family. As the saying goes, people don't fight with officials. They violated the taboo. Next, they would face a storm of attacks. Maybe the winery would be closed tomorrow. "Even if we don't do it, the winery will be closed tomorrow," Su Li said in a heavy tone. "Jin Cheng'ao's patience is limited. He won't do it more than 3 times. If we don't agree today, their means will be endless. So, we have a lot to do tonight." Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning frowned at the same time. From her tone, why did they feel that Su Li knew Jin Cheng'ao very well? Before everyone had a rest, Su Li and others told Haydn to be on guard. Then they changed into night clothes and went out of the city. Chu Qingning saw that Su Li used her martial arts movement and her speed was no less than theirs. He was so shocked that he widened his eyes. It turned out that Su Li knew martial arts. And it seemed that her realm was not low. She had been hiding it. When Chu Qingning thought of everything in the past 6 months, he felt angry. In the end, Su Li had been guarding against them all the time. Fang Yuan's reaction was much calmer than that of Chu Qingning. As early as when Su Li healed Fang Mu, he had some doubts. Now it just confirmed the speculation in his heart. Thinking of those gangsters he killed in the South Street of the Desu town a long time ago, Su Li was accustomed to the bloody scene. Fang Yuan was slightly nervous. Su Li. Did she kill people? How many did she kill? Su Li flew against the night wind, but she didn't mean to explain. The new moon was gradually wrapped in heavy clouds, and the scenery under the whole night sky became dreamy. Su Li, where are we going? We have been out of the city for an hour. Chu Qingning whispered impatiently. He hadn't reached the acquired 8th hurdle, so he hadn't mastered the ability to condense sounds into lines. Su Li's lips moved, and her clear voice came into the ears of Chu Qingning and Fang Yuan. Chu Qingning, from now on, you can't speak. Listen to my order. Fang Yuan, communicate with me in sound transmission. Don't leave any evidence. Then, Su Li handed 2 bone-changing pills to them. These 2 pills were her new attempt. The effect of camouflage was stronger, but the relative duration was much shorter. So, she didn't give them to them until now. Chu Qingning took a breath and felt that his heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and kidneys were all hurt. Originally, Fang Yuan's cultivation was higher than his, and he could comfort himself that Su Li didn't know martial arts. But now Su Li's real cultivation was also after the acquired 8th hurdle. How could he live? In the past, I could be the first genius of the family. But since I met Su Li, my cultivation talent is actually low. For a moment, Chu Qingning's eyes were slightly moist, and he felt wronged. Fang Yuan's eyes flashed. He was still thinking about what the green starlight was. He guessed Su Li's cultivation realm, so he was not surprised. Is that where we are going? At this time, Su Li stopped and pointed to a mountain. Under the dim starlight, they could vaguely see a small camp on the top of the mountain. The fire was like fireflies. Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning's faces changed slightly. What are we going to do there? Chapter 96. At this moment, in the village, Butler Jin covered his face with a towel and shouted angrily, I don't care. Don't forget that you are just a dog of the Jin family. The first master is the future head of the Jin family and even the general of the Dahan country. How dare you disobey his orders? As soon as he said that, the 3 leaders of the tiger village looked gloomy. Although what Butler Jin said was true, his words were too explicit and ugly. He didn't give them any face. At this time, the burly first leader stood up and said in a low voice, Butler Jin, since you said so, we have no reason to refuse. We, the Raging Tiger Troop, have no reason to refuse, but you have to give us time to prepare. Otherwise, we will be surrounded by the government, and your Jin family will be in trouble. Butler Jin snorted and suppressed his anger. He shouted coldly, tomorrow at the latest. Tomorrow, I will see you catch all the people of the Leanly building and let the child punish them, especially their boss, Mr. Li. Even if you can't catch others, you must catch this person. Then Butler Jin took out the portrait from his arms. The first leader took it and looked at it. He was so angry that he laughed and said, Butler, you are making things difficult for us. A person with a bamboo hat is everywhere on the street. Where can we find him? Even if we really bring him back, you won't recognize him. Butler Jin wanted to continue to say something. Suddenly, he stared at the back of the first leader. The 2 leaders subconsciously looked back and saw a sword and a saber quickly enlarged in front of them. Puff! The sword almost pierced their hearts at the same time. Ho ho! Warm blood spurted out. The 2 people made an inexplicable sound. Soon, they fell to the ground, twitched, and died. Seeing this scene, Butler Jin's blood was almost frozen. He was so scared that he couldn't move. He was afraid that if he moved, he would be the same as the 2 leaders of the tiger village. When the first leader heard the sound, his pupils shrank. He rushed out of the window like lightning. He thought that it was not a problem for him to escape with his cultivation and body movement. But soon, he found that his body strangely stopped. No matter how he ran forward. Then, what made him even more scared was that his body began to involuntarily step back. It was as if time went back and he returned to the original place. Ghost! Butler Jin was so scared that he fainted. The great leader was left alone, immersed in fear and unable to move. Telekinesis. It was telekinesis. Motherfucker, when did I offend a legendary figure? At this moment, the faint sound of wind blew over, and the great leader immediately smelled an extremely thick stench of blood. Apart from the living people in the houses, the entire raging tiger bastion was dead silent, not a single sound could be heard. Hoo-hoo, the great leader couldn't help but gasp in fear. Slowly turning around, he saw the bamboo hat man. His eyes widened as he looked at the portrait in his hand. He immediately understood what had happened. Butler Jin, you're courting death. How dare you bring the raging tiger troop with you? Tick-tock, tick-tock. Blood flowed down the tip of the sword and knife, dripping onto the dust with a dull sound. Chu Qingning and Fang Yuan stared at Su Li in a daze. Their faces were dull, but their hearts were in turmoil. Even though they had overestimated Su Li's cultivation and even thought that she was a senior at the peak of the acquired realm, they didn't expect that she was also a young master of the inborn realm. Another young master of the inborn realm. When did the young master of the inborn realm become so worthless? Chu Qingning curled his lips and looked at Fang Yuan, who was in a daze. He inexplicably felt distressed for him. Fang Yuan thought that others couldn't see it, but he was experienced after all. How could he not understand Fang Yuan's thoughts? Unfortunately, Fang Yuan was excellent, but it seemed that he was still far from being worthy of Su Li. Fang Yuan's eyes were firm. He tightly grasped the hilt of the sword, and the blood on his hands fell faster. He would not admit defeat. I admit defeat, and you can punish me as you wish. The great leader was very relaxed. Since Su Li was not in a hurry to kill him, it was obvious that she had something to ask, and he had a chance to live. Su Li chuckled and said, if you hadn't promised Butler Jin before, I might have felt guilty in my heart. The implication was that even if he didn't promise, this horrible woman would kill all the people in the raging tiger village. The great leader's lips trembled slightly. Compared with the real evil figures, what he had done before seemed to be child's play and was not worth mentioning at all. Those who kill will be killed by others. The people I killed in this life deserve it, and I won't have any guilt in my heart. Su Li suddenly muttered to herself, and then she sighed charmingly, Wu Lin, you have committed countless sins in your life. You deserve to die, but I will let you choose a more dignified way to die. What do you think? How do you know my name? The great leader's face was completely pale, as if the name was a taboo for him. I not only know it, but also know that you have a wife, a son, and an old mother. In your family, you are a businessman who doesn't know how to do business. You are not a bandit who commits all kinds of crimes, such as burning, killing, and looting. Su Li's words were light, but it made the 8-foot-tall man tremble all over. He knelt down and cried, Senior, I will do as you say. Please don't tell the truth to my family. Seeing Wu Lin kneeling at the feet of Su Li, Chu Qingning and Fang Yuan were completely silent, and it was difficult for them to calm down. It seemed that they knew Su Li for the first time today. The girl who seemed to be only 16 years old seemed to be more complicated than they thought. Late at night, the cold wind blew. The three people walked on the mountain road, and they were all protected by the genuine energy, so they were not cold. Facing the cold moonlight, Su Li held a small box in her hand and suddenly smiled. What? Do you think I am despicable and cruel? Chu Qingning immediately shook his head, and then he was silent for a moment, and said, The weak are pitiful and hateful. Wu Lin is not weak, so there is only hatred left. But if he dies, his family. I will take care of him secretly. Fang Yuan said, and obviously, he couldn't bear to die. Very good. Su Li smiled with melancholy, you still have compassion as a human, but I accidentally lost it a long time ago. In the night, there was a sweet chuckle, but it was sad in people's ears. The next day, the Qinghe provincial office really received Wu Lin's surrender, and an account was presented, which recorded the absurd things that the Jin family asked him to do secretly in these years. Satrap Yang was furious, but he didn't take any action. Obviously, the troops under his command were mobilized frequently. Su Li knew that it was impossible to bring down the Jin family only by this point. Wu Lin would finally die in prison, and the ending had been written. Because he took the poison prepared by herself. Jin Chengao, In the previous life, you took people to beat him to death on the street, and ruined my family. In this life, I'll let you have a taste of how painful that feeling is. Su Li stood on the top floor and looked at the south of the city. There seemed to be 2 clusters of small flames burning in her dark pupils. The matter of the tiger village was exposed, and the Jin family was badly battered. They had no time to pay attention to the Linli building. Su Li was free, but not free. There were too many things to prepare. Butler Jin returned to the Jin family in a daze, and he couldn't remember what happened last night. Didn't he go to the tiger village to give the order of the master? Why did he come back in a daze? Unconsciously, Butler Jin came to the study of Jin Cheng Ao. Jin Cheng Ao looked gloomy. When he saw Butler Jin coming, he slapped him without saying a word. Slap. Butler Jin couldn't stand the slap. He was thrown to the wall directly. He saw stars and spat out several teeth. Idiot. What did you do yesterday? Jin Cheng Ao was full of anger. Because of the matter of the tiger village, he was scolded by his father. Even the official's visit was blamed on him. He never allowed any stain on himself. When did he suffer such grievances? And all of this was brought by Butler Jin. Butler Jin was stunned. When he heard the angry words of the master, he immediately got up and knelt down. He repeatedly begged for mercy. Master, please understand. Yesterday, I went to the tiger village according to your order. He didn't dare to say that he seemed to remember nothing. He could only find something to say according to the original memory. Unexpectedly, when he just opened his mouth, he was slapped again. How dare you say that? Do you really think that I don't dare to change the butler? Ah. Don't hit me. I know I'm wrong. Master, someone will die if you hit me again. Butler Jin was almost beaten to death, but he couldn't say anything about what happened last night. Jin Cheng Ao suddenly felt that he must have something to hide. One of Butler Jin's legs was broken. His ending was miserable. Jin Cheng Ao asked someone to carry Butler Jin who couldn't speak. He restrained his anger and sneered, no matter who did it, it's ridiculous to rely on the tiger village to bring down the Jin family. The so-called account and confession were all Wu Lin's words. As long as the Jin family didn't admit it, they would be safe. But on the 3rd day, the Jin family suddenly learned from the informant of the official that Wu Lin suddenly died in prison. Before he died, he wrote the name Jin Cheng Ao. It made Jin Cheng Ao feel cold. He finally realized that the opponent's means were not as simple as he thought. In the satrap's mansion, Yang Zai said angrily, Father, the Jin family is too much. They don't respect the satrap's mansion at all. They even dare to kill people in prison. They are lawless. In front of him stood an elegant middle-aged man in an official uniform. From the surface, no one could see that he was Yang Sheshuan, the satrap who was in charge of the military power in the Qinghe town. Instead, he was more like a Confucian scholar who was well read. At this moment, the Confucian scholar's face was very cold. Obviously, he was extremely angry. The Jin family killed people in the government, which really challenged his bottom line. If he didn't do something, people would really think that he was just a decoration, but in his opinion, this matter was strange everywhere. He couldn't say it out. It was all based on his intuition. Although the Jin family was arrogant, they were arrogant secretly. He couldn't get anything on them. But this time, it was too obvious. Thinking of this, he raised his hand and asked, Zai, you took people to investigate the tiger village. What's the result? Yang Zai's expression didn't change. He nodded resolutely and said, as Wu Lin said, the tiger village was destroyed by the enemy. No one survived. It seems that Wu Lin surrendered himself to the government in order to save his life. But he failed to escape from the evil hands of the Jin family. It's really sad. Yang Sheshuan snorted coldly and said, Wu Lin is guilty and deserves to die. Even if his stronghold was exterminated, there's nothing to be pitied about. Those people all killed people. Zai, it's not the right place for you to be compassionate. You still need to gain more experience. Yes, Father. Yang Zai responded obediently. He retreated and went back to his house. But he found that his back was wet. In addition to the Linli building, only he knew that the tiger village was controlled by Ms. Li. His father also used to be a person in the martial arts circle. Sure enough, people in the martial arts circle were all so cold-hearted and ruthless. For a moment, Yang Zai was confused. He didn't know whether he was working hard in the right direction. Rumors gradually spread in the city. It turned out that the Jin family secretly supported the bandits. In these years, they burned, killed and looted. No one knew how much dirty money they had seized. But they pretended to be sanctimonious all day long. Among the ordinary people, there was public indignation. But they didn't dare to say anything. It was Su Li who arranged people to spread such remarks. Chu Qingning had been paying attention to the progress of things. When the discussion calmed down, he immediately came to Su Li to ask for the next step. The next step. Su Li put on her cloak and shrugged as if nothing had happened. She said, "I'm going to class. I have classes tomorrow." Chu Qingning was stunned and instantly speechless. Su Li's words seemed that she and Fang Yuan were the ones who caused all the troubles in the Qinghe town. Chapter 97. The cold wind was whistling outside, and the stove was lit in the warm room. It was as warm as spring. Yang Hongxiu pushed the door open and rushed in with her maid Huan. Her body, which was slightly curled up in the cold, suddenly stretched out. She glanced at Su Li, who was already sitting at the desk. She snorted and sat in her seat. Other seats were empty. Yang Hongxiu was the first to arrive. After a while, the other 4 people also came to the warm room. Jin Ruolan was still the last one, but she arrived on time. As soon as Jin Ruolan appeared, others immediately looked at her. Yang Hongxiu's eyes were cold. There were too many rumors about the Jin family these days. She didn't expect that Jin Ruolan dared to come to class at such a sensitive time. Jin Ruolan felt bitter in her heart. She didn't want to come at all. But thinking of Su Li's means last time, how dare she not come? Even if her family ordered her not to go out at will, she still sneaked out from the back door to attend class. Since everyone is here, let's start the class. Su Li, who was sitting at the desk and taking a nap, opened her eyes and said lightly, "Today Su Li was very familiar with the details of Han embroidery. Gong Minute and others were fascinated by it. But Yang Hongxiu, who had never been interested in embroidery, began to be absent-minded. Su Li probably doesn't know how chaotic the outside world is. Su Li is born in an ordinary family, but she lives in the school with a skill. She is also happy." Yang Hongxiu thought with a trace of helplessness, since the old guy of the Jin family became a supervisor, the situation of the family is getting worse year by year. If only I could share the burden for my father. The third brother said that the archery master he found for me is coming. I have never seen such an arrogant master. I haven't seen him for several days. Tonight, I want to see whether the master has 3 heads and 6 arms or is an almighty immortal. Even the third brother admires him so much. Suddenly, Su Li's harsh voice sounded in her ears. "Yang Hongxiu, what did I just say? Repeat it." Yang Hongxiu was scared and finally came to herself. Seeing Su Li, Gong Minute and others looking at her expressionlessly, she blushed. Stand aside and listen to the class. If you dare to be absent-minded next time, go out." Su Li's tone was light. Yang Hongxiu looked at the ice and snow outside and couldn't help but shiver slightly. She didn't dare to be distracted anymore. After class, Su Li assigned the embroidery homework and turned to leave. Seeing that Su Li walked out of the door, Yang Hongxiu finally couldn't help but sit down directly. She rubbed her sore legs and tears welled up in her eyes. She said, Su Li, how dare you treat me like this? Miss, are you all right?" Huan ran over to help Yang Hongxiu up. She couldn't help but wave her fist and said angrily, "Su Li is too much. Miss, why don't we find someone to beat them up?" Yang Hongxiu burst into laughter. She couldn't help but touch Huan Er's nose. "This can't work. I will be a female general in the future. A general should be fair. This time I was absent-minded in class, so I should be punished a little. How can I trouble Su Li?" Huan looked at Yang Hongxiu in horror, as if she didn't know the person in front of her. If it was in the past, the young lady would definitely not have said that. How could the young lady's temper become so good after a few days of class? After class, Su Li stayed in the school for half a day. She didn't return to the courtyard until the evening. After dinner, she changed into the identity of Mr. Li and walked slowly to the martial arts field of the girls' school. At this moment, Yang Hongxiu wore a thin martial arts suit and stood shivering in the cold wind. She looked at Yang Zai with hidden bitterness. She was so cold that she couldn't speak clearly. Third brother, will the master you speak of really come? It's almost midnight. Do you want to freeze Xiu to death? Yang Zai's face was also pale with cold. He didn't dare to say that he and Mr. Li had an appointment at midnight. Because he couldn't restrain his respect for the inborn senior, he came a little earlier. Suddenly, Yang Hongxiu saw a figure flashed behind Yang Zai, and there was a man in white. She was so scared that she almost screamed. Fortunately, Yang Zai covered her mouth in time, so she didn't disturb the people of the school. Third child, is this your sister, Yang Hongxiu? She really is a beauty in the making. Mr. Li's voice sounded in Yang Zai's ears. It was still so strange that people couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman. Yang Zai had heard this voice for a long time, but he felt that the voice was inexplicably pleasant. Maybe the extraordinariness of the inborn senior had been deified in his heart. Yang Hongxiu looked strange. She finally confirmed that the man in the bamboo hat, who was neither a man nor a woman, was the archery master that the third brother found for her. She couldn't help but point at Su Li and said angrily, "Third brother, who is he? He is so sneaky. I can tell that he is not a good person. What kind of master did you find for me?" Yang Zai was so scared that he broke into a cold sweat. He couldn't help but scold, "Shut up. Be respectful to the master." Yang Hongxiu had never seen such a fierce third brother. Her eyes suddenly turned red and she said, "Third brother, why are you so fierce to me?" After the stress, Yang Zai realized what he had done. He scolded himself for being stupid in his heart, but he didn't know how to comfort and explain. At this time, Su Li chuckled and said, "Forget it. Third child Yang, you are innocent because you didn't know. Your sister did it unintentionally. Don't be angry. It's me who was rude." Yang Zai was ashamed and thought that the temperament of the inborn senior was really beyond the reach of ordinary people. Yang Hongxiu was strong and didn't cry. She took the bow off her back and handed it to Su Li with difficulty. She said, "Since you are the archery master that the third brother found, show me some real skills. Otherwise, no matter who you are not qualified for me to call you master." Fourth sister. Yang Zai's words turned into a sigh at last. Even if he said that Mr. Li was an inborn senior, the fourth sister wouldn't think that it was powerful. The womenfolk of the Yang family knew far less about the martial arts circle than the men. "Is this the bow that your father gave you?" Su Li took it with one hand and looked at it carefully. There seemed to be a flash of light in her eyes. She sighed softly and said, "It is really a spiritual bow. He is even willing to give a spiritual bow to his daughter. It seems that satrap Yang dotes on Miss Hongxiu very much." Yang Hongxiu's face was slightly red. She turned her head and snorted. She thought that even if he praised her, she wouldn't be happy at all. Yang Zai sighed. His father was really forcing her. If Yang Hongxiu couldn't break through to the inborn realm, she couldn't draw the bow in her life, let alone 3 years. This year was the last year. After this year, the fourth sister could only stay at home and wait for her marriage. "I absolutely wouldn't allow my sister to become a victim of the family." Yang Zai's eyes flashed fiercely. He made a fist and palm salute to Su Li. He bowed deeply and said, "Mr. Li, my sister is yours. She only has 1 year. Although the request is too much, I still want to say that if my sister can't fulfill the agreement with my father, please help us." "Brother, what are you doing?" Yang Hongxiu saw that he was so humble. She was angry and said angrily, "Isn't it just a broken bow? Give me another year and I will definitely draw it." Yang Zai shook his head and still looked at Su Li without blinking. Su Li's bamboo hat moved a little. It seemed that she was considering the feasibility of the matter. After a while, she shook her head and said, "Third child Yang, you don't have to do this." Yang Zai's body collapsed and he couldn't help showing disappointment on his face. As expected, she didn't agree. Well, the martial arts circle and the imperial court had always complemented each other. His request was too much. Although the Leanly building is not a big winery, we can still guarantee our credibility. Since we have made an agreement with you, we can certainly do it. If we can't do it, there is only one possibility. That is, the Leanly building doesn't exist. Are you satisfied? Yang Zai was stunned on the spot. Did Ms. Li know what she was talking about? Why did it sound like an unrealistic lie to him? The Leanly building. Yang Hongxiu heard the keyword and looked at Su Li eagerly. She said, "Are you the boss of the Leanly building, Mr. Li?" Su Li nodded slightly and suddenly stretched out her hand to grasp the void behind her. Swish. In Yang Hongxiu's almost dull eyes, an arrow automatically flew out of the quiver and fell into her hand. She said, "Miss Hongxiu, time is running out. Tonight, I'll show you how to use this bow." Su Li took a slight breath and slowly pulled the silver longbow with the arrow in her hand. Buzz. The bow made a clear buzzing sound as if it was cheering. A bit of fluorescence gradually lit up from the tip of the arrow. It was as bright as a star and quickly enlarged in front of Yang Zai and his sister. At this moment, it was even brighter than the moonlight in the sky. Clang. The arrow was shot out like a meteor. There was no sound after it got out of the bow. When the light disappeared, Yang Hongxiu woke up. She couldn't help but run to the target. She saw a fist-sized hole in the center of the target. The arrow went deep into the ground, leaving a hole that couldn't be found anymore. What kind of archery is this? Yang Hongxiu stood in the cold wind in a daze. She couldn't help but pinch her arm. "It hurts." She hissed softly and looked up at Su Li, who stood beside Yang Zai and held the bow with one hand. Her clear eyes immediately lit up. The scorching heat instantly burned all the previous disdain and doubt, leaving only deep worship. "Is she an immortal? My brother found an immortal master for me." Yang Hongxiu's eyes were hot and she immediately ran to Su Li. Su Li stood in the same place and felt strange. At the moment when she pulled the bow and shot the arrow, another group of unknown stars seemed to automatically escape and disappeared into the arrow. The force used was the same force. But the power of this arrow was much more powerful than that of the archery she practiced in the past 2 days. Yang Zai was shocked and his blood was boiling. This was the inborn realm. He was like an immortal on the earth. Even his father didn't dare to be disrespectful in front of Mr. Li. He only relied on his own strength to control his destiny. This was the life he wanted. "Immortal Master, you are so awesome." At this time, Yang Hongxiu walked back from the target. She simply knelt down and obediently admitted her mistake. She said, "Immortal Master, forgive me for my disrespect just now. I will follow you to practice archery in the future and won't tarnish your reputation." Even if Yang Hongxiu didn't know much about the martial arts circle, her eyes wouldn't lie. The person who could shoot the light must be a senior who was more powerful than her father. She finally understood why the third brother was scared in front of Mr. Li. She finally knew the third brother's good intention. It was ridiculous that she contradicted such a person before. She could only hope that it was not too late to kneel down and admit her mistake. "I have no intention to accept you as an apprentice." Chapter 98. It seemed that Su Li didn't see Yang Hongxiu's expression and continued to say, "The fate between you and me began with a deal between Child Yang and me. We're not master and disciple." His words were cold and indifferent, which made Yang Hongxiu's heart cold. She looked a little better. It turned out that Mr. Li was not angry because of her behavior. But why did she feel more bitter in her heart? Maybe my performance just now was better. Will this person really accept me as a disciple? Yang Hongxiu still held an unrealistic dream. She played with Yang Zai since childhood and was greatly influenced by him. In addition to the dream of being a female general, she also dreamed of being a chivalrous heroine in the martial arts circle. In her mind, Mr. Li was obviously her ideal image. "Mr. Li," Yang Zai took a deep breath and barely regained his composure. "If my sister learns archery from you, can she really break through that realm within a year?" "Of course not." Su Li looked at Yang Zai and teased him. "If the inborn realm is really as easy as you said, wouldn't the martial arts circle be in a mess?" Mr. Li, you mean? Yang Zai was immediately anxious. Su Li waved her hand and said lightly, I naturally have other ways to let your sister master this bow, although it is not as powerful as the inborn realm. But if she can use this bow to fight, at least your sister's archery skills will be better than County Chief Yang's. Young master, can you accept this result? Before Yang Zai said it, Yang Hongxiu shouted in surprise, I can accept it. Dad was the #1 expert in Qinghe town, although it was only on the surface. However, if she could surpass her father in archery, she would not need to be manipulated by her family. It would not be impossible for her to become a female general in the future. Our brother and sister can naturally accept Sir's words. Yang Zai's face was filled with joy. Then, he hesitated a little and said, don't worry, young master. The Linli building will not let you down. Su Li made a promise and looked at Yang Hongxiu again. This year, Miss Hongxiu will suffer a little. Yang Hongxiu was slightly flustered, but she finally gritted her teeth and said, Mr. Li, don't worry. As long as I can achieve my goal, I can persist. Then the first step, Su Li put the silver bow in Yang Hongxiu's hand and said, no matter when you eat, sleep, or go anywhere in the future, you must be careful. They had to carry this bow with them and stroke it at least 1,000 times a day. If you can do it, I'll tell you the next step in a month. Can't leave my body? Yang Hongxiu stared blankly at the silver longbow in her hand, which was not much shorter than her height. Her face instantly darkened. Jin Family East Courtyard Study. Jin Cheng Ao lazily leaned against the back of the chair. He lowered his eyes and said in a very oppressive voice, what did my father say? The manservant who was bowing in front of Jin Cheng Ao was shocked and immediately replied, Master said that you should stop for the time being. You can't deal with the Linli building before we find out the culprit. When Jin Cheng Ao heard the words, he immediately laughed in a low voice, I'm old after all. I'm overcautious. My goal was not only the Dahan country. How could I waste time in the small Qinghe province? Since he doesn't allow me to touch the Linli building, what about the embroidery workshop? The manservant bent his body and didn't dare to move. He knew that the master didn't ask him at all. If you can get the embroidery workshop, the Jin family will have a greater say. The head of the Jin family looked at his son with a complicated and ambitious look. He said, but Gong Xiangjuan is extremely difficult to deal with. If you want the embroidery workshop, you can't avoid her. She and the housekeeper of the Yang family may not be able to enter the door if you visit them. Father, you must be joking. Jin Cheng Ao patted the folding fan in his hand and laughed wantonly. The workshop owner of the embroidery workshop is a little girl. The supervisor is not only effective to the satrap's mansion, but also to the embroidery workshop. The head of the Jin family's pupils shrank and his face immediately darkened. He said, what do you want to do? We can't offend the Gong family. Father, don't worry. I know what to do. Jin Cheng Ao's eyes were full of smiles. An inexplicable sense of danger slowly diffused from him. Even his father, the head of the Jin family, couldn't help but feel cold. Since his son came back that year, he seemed to be a different person. Although he was very pleased with his son's outstanding talent and ability, he could no longer feel the affection between father and son. On this day, Su Li was bored inside. Suddenly, someone came to pass a message. Something happened to the embroidery workshop. Su Li raised her eyebrows and glanced at Jiao Dahai, who came to report with sweat all over his head. She said in a low voice, take me there. Looking at Su Li's calm face, Jiao Dahai also calmed down a lot. He hurriedly took Su Li to drive the carriage to the embroidery workshop. At this time, to attack the embroidery workshop, sitting in the carriage, Su Li pondered from time to time. There were not many families who dared to attack the embroidery workshop. Not to mention that Gong Xiangjuan was still alive. She could guess who dared to attack the embroidery workshop at this time without thinking. Has Jin Cheng Ao already got the practice method at this time? Su Li gently rubbed her eyebrows and suddenly smiled meaningfully. She said, it turns out that it is much simpler than I thought. Whoa! Jiao Dahai stopped the carriage. Su Li immediately walked out and rushed to the back hall of the embroidery workshop. At this moment, the atmosphere in the back hall of the embroidery workshop was extremely solemn. Jiao-en, the chief steward, stood in the front. Behind him stood a group of angry embroidery artificers. Opposite them was a group of cold-looking rich businessmen. Everyone, I have already said that this batch of embroidery is not from the embroidery workshop. The embroidery workshop in the Qinghe province is full of treasures. The embroidery you take out is full of mistakes. Even the basic stitches are wrong. How can it be produced by our embroidery workshop? Jiao-en explained with a calm face. The leading rich businessman on the opposite side sneered, "Old man, you really know how to flatter yourself. Since your embroidery workshop changed its owner, I found that these rubbish often mixed in the embroidery. It must be that your embroidery workshop embezzled the profits. You still don't admit it." Jiao-en's expression changed immediately. How could he not know what kind of person the new workshop owner was? Every time she came here, she never mentioned the business profits of the embroidery workshop. She even didn't take the salary in recent months. Would such a workshop owner think of ways to embezzle the profits of the embroidery workshop? Jiao-en didn't need to think to know that someone wanted to attack Su Li. Thinking of the young girl with superb craftsmanship, Jiao-en became more determined. He would never allow the workshop owner Shu to be slandered. What's so noisy? At this time, a clear voice came from outside the door. Su Li rushed in with a bit of concern on her face. Jiao Dahai, who was behind her, saw that there was no change in the scene. He immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Workshop owner, you finally come." A group of embroidery artificers with red eyes saw Su Li. It seemed that they found their backbone and surrounded her. Since Su Li took over the embroidery workshop, their lives were the same as before. But their embroidery skills had more or less improved under Su Li's guidance. Therefore, although Su Li was the youngest among them, it did not prevent them from being respectful to Su Li. Seeing this scene, the rich businessman curled his lips. He didn't expect that this silly girl had such a high prestige in the embroidery workshop. What a pity, workshop owner, you come at the right time. Jiao-en looked worried. He didn't think that Su Li's coming would be of any use. But he still explained the matter. Su Li nodded slightly. She walked to the pile of ragged cloth and squatted down to check it carefully. The rich businessman immediately smiled and said, "Workshop owner Su, even if you see it 10,000 times, you can't change the fact that these are from the embroidery workshop. You'd better admit it. Did you embezzle our hard-earned money? Yes, admit it quickly, bitch. I didn't expect that you are so young and greedy. I'm afraid that you are dizzy with glory. Do you think that the whole embroidery workshop belongs to you? Bastard, get out of the embroidery workshop quickly." The embroidery artificers behind the rich businessman immediately scolded Su Li. Jiao-en's face changed. Seeing that Su Li was still squatting down to check the ragged cloth, the embroidery artificers couldn't help but cry in a low voice. God, the workshop owner was only a 16-year-old girl. Why did she suffer so much abuse? Jin Ruolan hid among the embroidery artificers. She was so happy that she almost laughed out loud. Su Li, I didn't expect that you would be a thorn in my brother's side. Now I want to see how you can keep your identity. It's a big crime to embezzle the profit of the embroidery workshop. After seeing the last batch of embroidery, Su Li slowly stood up and raised her head. Her expression didn't change at all. She said lightly, "Have you finished?" The whole back hall was suddenly quiet. Even the rich businessman's face changed. He was held by an invisible force and his breath was slightly short. Su Li smiled slightly and said, "Since you have finished, it's my turn." Then she picked up a piece of embroidery and asked, "Squire, do you remember the specific delivery time of this embroidery?" The rich businessman's expression didn't change. He snorted and said, "Who remembers that kind of trivial stuff? These substandard products are mixed with good ones. It's very difficult for me to pick them out one by one. What about the approximate time?" Su Li's smile seemed to be meaningful. "Is it within 1 month? That is to say, these are the orders delivered after I took office." Su Li's words obviously meant something. Many embroidery artificers thought of something and their eyes lit up. The rich businessman didn't notice this and immediately nodded and said, "Of course. When Ms. Gong was the workshop owner, such a thing never happened." How can I doubt the character of the old workshop owner? Clap, clap. Su Li immediately clapped her hands with a smile, which made the rich businessman and others dumbfounded. Then today's matter is a bit interesting. Ching Shong, explain to this squire. Su Li said a person's name. Suddenly, a young woman with a shrewd face walked out from the embroidery artificers behind her. This woman was a talent that Su Li found in nearly 1 month's observation. Ching Shong looked at Su Li with a little excitement and then hurriedly bent down to check the cloth. Seeing this, the rich businessmen were shocked. Could it be that there really was a flaw? One of them subconsciously looked at Jin Ruolan. Jin Ruolan immediately shook her head slightly, indicating that she didn't know. Su Li saw this scene but didn't point it out. Workshop owner, I have checked it. Chapter 99. Hearing Ching Shong's words, the expressions of all the wealthy merchants changed drastically. Seeing this, Ching Shong sneered and continued, the first possibility is that this batch of embroidery came from the list of goods from a month ago. However, the squire had already denied it, so there was only the second possibility. That is, this batch of embroidery came from the apprentices of the embroidery workshop. Our embroidery workshop has never allowed apprentices to make a single. This rule is set by the government. Even the workshop owner can't change it. Jioran came forward with a smile on his face, but his eyes were so cold that it could almost kill people. He said, I would like to ask you all, where did you steal this batch of inferior goods? The embroidery of the apprentices of the embroidery workshop in Qinghe Prefecture is destroyed every day. Looks like this old man needs to do a thorough investigation. You, don't spout nonsense. The leading merchant stuttered for a long time and couldn't say a complete sentence. In the end, he could only say bitterly, you guys are good. Let's wait and see. Seeing this group of people leaving in a hurry like dogs that had lost their homes, the whole embroidery workshop burst into cheers. Yay! We won. Boss, you're amazing. You solved the problem as soon as you arrived. It's great that I can prove my innocence. There must be a spy in the embroidery workshop. Don't let me know who it is, or I'll skin him alive. Jioran smiled and sent everyone back to work. He walked to Su Li and said with shame, Workshop owner, I'm a disgrace to you. It doesn't matter. After all, you are not familiar with embroidery. Su Li waved her hand and said, it's not a good thing for apprentice embroidery to be leaked out. This matter should be carefully investigated and no one can be spared. Yes. Jioran bowed slightly and was finally completely convinced by Su Li. It turned out that the owner of the old workshop did not choose people to sit in this position at random. He had thought that Su Li would be in a panic when she encountered such a thing, and he would be the one to save her. He didn't expect the truth to be completely different from what he had imagined. He was even comforted by this young lady. Thinking of this, Jioran smiled bitterly. After Su Li left the embroidery workshop, she didn't have time to go back to the school. Instead, she came to the Linli building immediately. Investigate Gong Xiangjuan's condition immediately. Chu Qingning, prepare the medicinal materials on the list. I will refine the medicine overnight. Fang Yuan, go to the Jin family to see whether there are officers and soldiers of the supervisor. Don't be found. There are seniors in the Jin family. After a series of orders, all the senior members of the Linli building were gone. Su Li stood on the top floor and looked at the south of the city. The light in her eyes flickered. No one knew what she was thinking. Su Li, I bought all the things. Even if I couldn't buy them, I still stole them. See if I'm right. Chu Qingning hurriedly came in and put a large bag of things in front of Su Li. Su Li glanced at it and took it into the underground additum. Li Chu Li Li. Su Chu Li, and Chu. Li Li came. Su, it. Su, Li said. Li, Su, comma of people. Yang Hongxiu murmured, but she still carried the bow on her back. Then, she picked up the ordinary long bow and practiced. Yang Shishuan looked at her in the dark, and he was more confused. His daughter's enthusiasm for practicing the bow suddenly increased these days. Besides, she carried the bow all day and behaved strangely. He was worried about her. He had been following her secretly, but he didn't see anything special. As for what Yang Hongxiu was thinking, he certainly couldn't know. Forget it. In the last year, let her do whatever she wants. She is influenced by Zai too much. Yang Shishuan's eyes dimmed when he thought of Yang Zai. He said, Zai, the martial arts circle is not as simple as you think. When you grow up, you will understand my good intentions. That circle is not suitable for ordinary people. Late at night, the stars were getting dimmer. Squeak, the wooden door of the underground additum was opened, and there was a faint smell of medicine. Su Li walked out of the door with a tired face. She spent a lot of energy practicing today. Are you all right? It was the first time for Fang Yuan to see Su Li with such an expression. He subconsciously asked. Su Li glanced at him, and then put a bottle of white powder in his palm. She said, You should have inquired about the residence of Butler Jin. After dawn, if it is me, you. Fang Yuan's expression changed slightly. He held the bottle tightly and asked, Is there any other way? Su Li smiled and said, What? Can you think of a better way? Fang Yuan was silent immediately. After a while, he put away the bottle and said in a deep voice, If what you said is not good, I will do it myself. Su Li didn't answer again. She turned around and put a letter in Chu Qingning's hand. She said, You go to Yang Zai and give it to him alone. I believe he will know what to do after reading it. By the way, how about the news I asked Haydn to inquire about? Chu Qingning felt strange and said, Su Li, how did you guess that Gong Xiangjuan would be seriously ill? Was it you who poisoned her? Su Li shook her head with a smile and said, You are not as smart as Yin Xuetong. If not, how could that silly girl fall in love with you? You. Chu Qingning stared at her and said with hatred, If you don't want to tell me, I will ask Xuetong. Fang Yuan felt helpless and thought, You still have the mood to joke at this time. After dawn, Su Li returned to the courtyard of the school. Mammy Li just woke up and saw Su Li sitting in the central room. She immediately asked, Miss, don't you sleep for a while? Su Li bowed her head and tidied up her clothes. She said calmly, I don't want to be too embarrassed. What? Mammy Li looked confused. Suddenly, boom, the wooden door of the courtyard was suddenly blasted open by a huge force. It broke into two halves and fell to the ground. A group of officers and soldiers with knives rushed in aggressively. When they saw Su Li, they immediately surrounded her. Workshop owner Su, now the supervisory department suspects that you collude with embroidery merchants and embezzle profits from them. The supervisor ordered that from today on, you will be put into the prison of the supervisory department to await the trial. Mammy Li was shocked. When she was about to argue with Su Li, the officers and soldiers directly put a knife on her neck and she couldn't move. Su Li didn't seem to see the knives all around her. She said lightly, What happened yesterday is slander. I am the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop. My status is equal to the supervisor and satrap. The supervisory department arrested me without evidence. Aren't you afraid that the satrap's mansion will file a lawsuit to Yunjing? The leader's face changed slightly. He immediately sneered and said, Workshop owner Su, you are exaggerating. The supervisory department just asks you to go back to cooperate with the investigation. If you are wronged, you can explain to the supervisor. Take her away. Then, two people wanted to press Su Li's hands. Su Li shook them off fiercely. She was angry and said, How dare you? I can go by myself. I want to see how the supervisor will slander an innocent person. The leader sneered in his heart. He had never seen anyone who could come out safely after entering the prison of the supervisory department. But on the surface, he still stretched out his hand and said, Workshop owner Su, please. A group of officers and soldiers of the supervisory department didn't make a detour. They just took Su Li away from the gate of the school. Just for a moment, the whole Qinghe town was in an uproar. What? Su Li was taken away by the supervisory department. When Ruomin pounded the table angrily and asked anxiously, When did it happen? Damn it. Sister Gong just fell ill. The Jin family immediately took action. They are really well informed. No, I have to go to the satrap's mansion. I can't let anything happen to Su Li. The spies of the Linli building got the news immediately. Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning couldn't help but tremble slightly. At the same time, they acted according to Su Li's order. Su Li was taken away by the Jin family. Yang Hongxiu was still eating breakfast. When she heard such a shocking news, she almost choked to death. "Miss, I just know it. Will Su Li be all right?" Huan said worriedly. Although the little lecturer looked extremely strict, the temperament and embroidery skills of the miss had obviously improved. How could such a good lecturer do bad things? "I'm going to find my father." Putting down the half-eaten breakfast, Yang Hongxiu carried the bow and ran out. Although she said she hated Su Li, she immediately panicked when she heard that Su Li was taken away by such a vicious family. "Su Li, you have to hold on." When Yang Hongxiu came to her father's yard, she didn't find Yang Shishuan. When she asked the housekeeper, she knew that her father had already taken people to denounce Yang Shishuan. On the other side, Yang Zai didn't feel anything when he heard the news. Although the embroidery workshop was in trouble for the Yang family, he couldn't help with his identity and ability. He could only not get involved and make trouble for his father. Whoosh! Suddenly, a dart penetrated into the study and nailed directly in front of Yang Zai. It was only an inch away from Yang Zai's hand. "Who is it?" Yang Zai was shocked. He immediately turned over and jumped out of the window. He looked around but didn't see anyone. He went back to the study and took down the dart. When he opened the note on the dart, his face immediately changed. "Ms. Li." After reading the small words on it, Yang Zai's breath immediately changed from helplessness to confidence. He immediately burned the note. He didn't expect that Ms. Li would also intervene in this matter. As long as he acted according to the plan, he would definitely be able to cause a blow to the Jin family and prevent the Jin family from continuing to seize the embroidery workshop. "Father, let me help you this time." Thinking of this, Yang Zai went out confidently. At this moment, in the supervisory department, Yang Shishuan looked at Jin Zhentian, the master of the Jin family, who was dressed in the official uniform of the supervisor. "Jin Zhentian, you have gone too far this time. You arrested the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop without any evidence. Do you really think that the Qinghe province belongs to your family?" The matter of the Tiger Village and Wu Lin had already made his patience reach the limit. The matter of the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop even touched his nerves. If Jin Zhentian couldn't give an explanation, he would definitely take action directly without any scruples. Even if both sides were injured, he would not hesitate. Jin Zhentian laughed and said, "Satrap Yang, don't worry. I just act according to the rules. Yesterday, a group of rich businessmen came to me to complain that he was embezzled a lot of silver by the embroidery workshop. He went to the embroidery workshop to reason but was driven out. Then he took out the inferior embroidery of the embroidery workshop. Since the authentication and material evidence are both here, I naturally have to invite workshop owner Su back and investigate it carefully." Yang Shishuan frowned and said, "Jin Zhentian, you should know the regulations of the supervisory department better than me. You can't make a confession under torture. You arrested her without investigation. Don't you care about the regulations of the Dahan country?" "Lord Yang, you are wrong. Workshop owner Su is also a person of high status and power. If I arrest her after the investigation, it will be easy for the information to be leaked and workshop owner Su can escape." Jin Zhentian was full of smiles, like a smiling tiger. The rules are dead, but people are alive. Therefore, this lowly official could only come up with this plan and capture him first. However, Lord Yang can rest assured that the supervisory department will take good care of workshop owner Su during the investigation. I promise that she will not lose a hair. As long as Lord Yang can prove that workshop owner Su is innocent, I will let her go immediately. Yang Shishuan's face was faintly blue. After looking at Jin Zhentian for a few seconds, he finally couldn't help but snort coldly and leave. Jin Zhentian was very well prepared. It was meaningless for him to waste time here. Now he could only hope that the group of so-called rich businessmen had not gone far. Walking out of the door, Yang Shishuan looked at the clear sky outside the supervisory department and sighed deeply. Chapter 100. The sunlight mixed with flying dust sprinkled down from the stone fence window. The hay on the ground made a slight crackling sound and burst out a little moldy smell. Su Li sat down against the wall. She neither shouted angrily nor cried in a low voice. She was unusually quiet, which surprised the two jailers who were in charge of her. Screams and screams came from time to time, but Su Li didn't seem to hear them. She slowly stretched out her hand, and a little sunshine shone on her fingertips, exuding warmth. Compared with the deep underground death prison in the previous life, the treatment in this life was much better. A smile appeared on the corner of Su Li's mouth. It was a smile, but it made the two jailers shudder. Why is she still smiling? Is she crazy because of stimulation? In the woodshed of the Jin family, which was specially used to punish servants who made mistakes, there was a faint smell of blood in the room. Butler Jin lay on the hay and looked at the roof blankly. His right leg was twisted into a very strange angle. The wound was simply bandaged, but it was obviously not effective. Yellow pus could be seen flowing out of the gap. Suddenly, the door of the woodshed was opened with a slight sound. Butler Jin didn't look at it and continued to stare at the roof. Fang Yuan looked at the food all over the ground. There was no sign that the food had been touched. He knew that Butler Jin had fasted for many days. He was silent for a moment. Then he picked up the bucket next to him and poured it directly on Butler Jin's face. The cold touch made the butler tremble. He immediately turned his head slowly. When he saw Fang Yuan's disguised face, he trembled even more. He struggled to step back and shouted weakly, "Come on, come on, come on, come on, Master." But his voice was even lower than that of a mosquito. "Now, you still think of your master? Don't forget who broke your leg." Fang Yuan stood still, and his cold words pierced Butler Jin's heart like a knife. He said, "If I didn't appear, you would have been thrown to the mass grave by the servants of the Jin family after you died in the woodshed a few days later." Butler Jin stared at Fang Yuan and his eyes suddenly turned red. He said in a hoarse voice like a beast, "So what? I have been disabled. Are you here to laugh at me for your master? Of course not." Fang Yuan took out a piece of wood and threw it in front of Butler Jin. He said, "As long as you can do one thing for my master will restore your limbs." Butler Jin's expression froze, then he laughed crazily. "Do you think I'm a 3-year-old kid? You want me to believe such nonsense?" Fang Yuan's eyes showed impatience, but his tone was still calm. He said, "I almost forget that you have taken the medicine of the master and have completely forgotten what happened in the tiger village. Butler Jin, I'm here to give you a chance to take revenge. Even without you, I can still complete the task for master. Don't miss this opportunity." Butler Jin's expression finally changed. He really couldn't remember what happened in the raging tiger village that day, but this person said it was because of his master's medicine. Was there really a medicine in this world that could make people lose their memory for a short time? He remembered that he had only done everything according to the young master's instructions. In the end, he had been severely punished by the young master and had one of his legs broken. Butler Jin's face became more and more ferocious, and the flame of hatred burned in his eyes. "Now that I'm like this, even taking 2 steps is difficult. What do you want from me?" Butler Jin stared at Fang Yuan and asked slowly. Fang Yuan squatted down and put a bag of medicine into Butler Jin's hand. He whispered, "Don't worry. It's not a poison that can kill people immediately. I believe that with your identity, it's very easy to make your young master drink this medicine by accident, isn't it?" Butler Jin's hand holding the medicine bag trembled slightly. A trace of fear flashed in his pupils, but it was soon replaced by madness. He said, "As long as I can see Jin Cheng'ao's miserable end, I'm willing to do anything. Don't worry. With my master's intervention, this day will not be too far away. You can live to see it." Fang Yuan gently patted Butler Jin's shoulder and left the Jin family quietly, as if he had never been here. Butler Jin stared at the medicine bag in his hand. Then he gritted his teeth and stood up with the support of the wooden stick. Then he jumped out of the woodshed. In the study, Jin Cheng'ao was lowering his head to study the swordsmanship book. He smiled from time to time. Obviously, he was in a very good mood. Those rich businessmen had been secretly dealt with by him. Even if Yang Shushuan searched the whole Qinghe province, he couldn't find them. The young workshop owner would stay in the supervisory division for at least a year and a half. Just as a country couldn't live without a king, the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop couldn't be vacant for a long time. Without Gong Xiangjuan's obstruction, the Jin family could let Jin Ruolan sit in the position of the workshop owner successfully. The situation was very good. Jin Cheng'ao was naturally in a good mood. "Young master, Butler Jin said that he has something important to see you." Suddenly, there was a report outside the door. Jin Cheng'ao raised his head slightly and frowned slightly. Didn't he break the old guy's leg? How dare he come here? He wanted to refuse directly, but he was a little curious. So, he nodded and said, "Let him in." After a while, Butler Jin, who had rearranged himself, appeared in the room with a cane. Although he was severely punished by the young master, he was still the butler of the Jin family temporarily. He could take a bath and change his clothes. "Young master, I got the result of the thing you asked me to inquire about before," Butler Jin said breathlessly. The sharp pain in his right leg made him feel as if he was pierced by a blade every time he took a step. Although he had taken a bath, his back was all wet. "What's the matter?" Jin Cheng'ao raised his eyebrows and couldn't help but recall. The old butler had always worked for him. There were too many things that the butler had told him. So, he couldn't remember for a while. "It's this." Butler Jin took out a small bottle from his arms. When he shook it, there was a sound of water. It was unknown what kind of liquid it was. He pulled out the stopper of the bottle, and a refreshing fragrance suddenly filled the whole study room. The treasure of heaven and earth. Mystic stone milk. Jin Cheng'ao's eyes were shining. He took the jade bottle from Butler Jin's hand in a flash. He couldn't help being ecstatic. Although the amount was not much, such a small bottle of mystic stone milk was enough for him to improve his cultivation. "Good. Very good. Old butler, you are very good." Jin Cheng'ao couldn't help but praise him. When he looked up, he found that Butler Jin fell on the ground and groaned. It turned out that his action had knocked Butler Jin down. However, he focused on the jade bottle. He didn't care about Butler Jin's life or death. However, it was also thanks to Butler Jin that he could get the mystic stone milk. Jin Cheng'ao hesitated for a moment and immediately shouted, "Come on, take the old butler away to treat his injury. Don't delay." "Thank you, young master." Butler Jin's face was full of gratitude, but he was laughing crazily in his heart. "Jin Cheng'ao, I knew you were looking for this, but I didn't take it out. I didn't expect that it would be useful one day. It is filled with the medicine that person gave me. Drink it as much as you want. Drink it until you die." Ha 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 ha. After Butler Jin was carried away, Jin Cheng'ao immediately took the jade bottle and was ready to take it. However, he suddenly felt that it was not appropriate. He asked the manservant who recently replaced Butler Jin to pour a little mystic stone milk for him to drink. "Young master, this thing is really delicious. After drinking it, I feel warm in my stomach. It seems that my body has inexhaustible strength." The manservant was intoxicated with the drink. His eyes were shining. He stared at the bottle in Jin Cheng'ao's hand and couldn't wait to take another sip. Jin Cheng'ao saw that the manservant was fine, and he was quite distressed. He waved his hand angrily to dismiss the manservant. "Tell my father that I'm going to practice in isolation for a day. No one can disturb me." One day later, Jin Cheng'ao walked out of the adytum with a sullen face. He always felt that he could break through if he went one step further, but he couldn't calm down somehow. It seemed that someone was talking in his ear. "The amount of mystic stone milk is still too small," Jin Cheng'ao muttered. He walked out of the room and hurried to Butler Jin's residence. He was in the situation, but he didn't realize that he had lost his usual calmness. "Young master." Butler Jin was lying on the bed. Suddenly, he saw Jin Cheng'ao coming. He was so scared that his face turned pale. Was he discovered by the young master? Jin Cheng'ao waved his hand impatiently. "Where did you get the mystic stone milk? Is there anything else?" Butler Jin was stunned. How could he know that it happened more than a year ago? It was an unexpected gain. How could there be any origin? At this time, he suddenly heard a voice in his ear. Tell him that it has something to do with the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop. Make up a suitable reason. Butler Jin trembled slightly. The voice was so abrupt that he was almost scared out of his wits. But he still recognized the owner of the voice. He immediately suppressed the panic in his heart and opened his mouth to say, "Young master, I remember. I got this bottle of treasure from the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop a month ago. That is, Su Li, who was caught by you. She was not a lecturer of the girls' school at that time, and her status was not so high. I easily got it after some intimidation." After that, Butler Jin looked at Jin Cheng-ao nervously. Although he had tried his best to cover up the lie, he could still detect the flaws if he thought carefully. "Su Li." Jin Cheng-ao frowned and immediately left without saying anything. He went to the supervisory division. Butler Jin was dumbfounded. When did the young master become so impatient? In his impression, the young master always made a plan before making a decision. He was never as impulsive as he was today. Is it? Butler Jin suddenly thought of something. He was horrified and didn't dare to say another word. The voice just now made him suspect that the young man who gave him the medicine package was still around him. If he did something that was exposed, he was likely to be killed. Ms. Li said that she would cure my legs. Butler Jin carefully shrank back to the bed. After experiencing all kinds of strange things, he actually had a little confidence in Ms. Li. If she could recover her limbs, why did he need to die? But he didn't know that Fang Yuan was not around at this moment. He followed Jin Cheng-ao. "You are so young. It's rare for you to reach the acquired 9th hurdle. It's a pity that you took Su Li's medicine and are impetuous. You can't find me." Fang Yuan was extremely calm. Jin Cheng-ao attracted attention in front of him. He avoided all the eyes and ears and quietly entered the prison of the supervisory division. At this moment, in the satrap's mansion, Yang Zai got the news. He immediately ran to his father and said hurriedly, "Father, go to save workshop owner Su. I just got the news that Jin Cheng-ao went to the prison of the supervisory division. I'm afraid that he will hurt workshop owner Su. If workshop owner Su is really beaten to death or disabled, it will be terrible." "Jin Cheng-ao?" Yang Shishuan heard it and stood up immediately. He said, "Hurry up. Go and gather people. He has always been lawless. Even his father can't control him. We have to stop him quickly." Chapter 101. As soon as he stepped into the dungeon, the cold and damp atmosphere immediately made Jin Cheng-ao frown. He had been here before, but today he felt that this place was really disgusting. "Master, workshop owner Su is locked up here." The jailer pointed to a single cell. Looking in the direction he was pointing, one could see a young girl huddled together in the corner. She was wearing a thin prison uniform, and her body was trembling slightly. One could not help but feel a sense of pity for her. Seeing this scene, Jin Cheng-ao was not anxious. He waved his hand to dismiss the jailer. Then he opened the cell door and walked in. Hearing the footsteps, Su Li immediately raised her head when she heard the footsteps. She saw a young and indifferent face. Jin Cheng-ao. Su Li didn't see him in her previous life, but the image in the biography was quite vivid. She recognized him at a glance. "Workshop owner Su, you are really embarrassed." Jin Cheng-ao squatted down and stared at Su Li's dirty face with a pair of playful eyes. He said, "I didn't expect that workshop owner Su is only 16 years old. I didn't believe it at first. But after seeing you in person, I think you look much younger than 16 years old. What do you want to do?" Su Li's body trembled, and a trace of stubbornness and fear appeared in her eyes just right. Fang Yuan, who was in the dark, rolled his eyes. But when he thought of Su Li's next actions, he couldn't help but hesitate. "Workshop owner Su, don't worry. I won't do anything to you." A trace of lust flashed in Jin Cheng-ao's eyes, "as long as you are obedient." Su Li was slightly stunned when she saw this scene. Then a hint of hidden killing intent flashed in her eyes. She didn't use aphrodisiac, but she didn't expect that Jin Cheng-ao was so unbearable. His first thought when he saw her was, Fang Yuan, who was above their heads, heard this. His right hand, which was holding the sword, trembled slightly. His calm eyes immediately burned with anger. What did this bastard want to do? Workshop owner Su, please have a look at this thing. Do you remember its origin? Jin Cheng Ao restrained his thoughts and took out the jade bottle. But this didn't mean that he had given up his previous idea. When the embroidery workshop elected a new workshop owner, this girl would have no status to protect her. Just by looking at her, he knew that this girl was still a virgin. He had long been tired of his second sister and the maids of the Jin family. It was a good time for him to change his taste. Su Li raised her head and looked at the jade bottle with a little doubt in her eyes. But soon she figured it out and said, "This is mine. It was robbed before. How could it be in your hands?" Jin Cheng Ao was happy when he heard that. "Do you still have the things inside?" "Huh. If you can tell me the exact location, I will plead with my father to spare your life." Su Li's face immediately showed disbelief and fear. "Spare my life? I'm innocent. You don't have any evidence. You can't do anything to me." Jin Cheng Ao heard it and immediately laughed. Workshop owner Su is really naive. "Can't I make it without evidence? Do you think you'll be able to walk out of here in 1 or 2 days when the workshop owner is changed?" "What?" Su Li was dissatisfied and desperate. She couldn't help but step back a few steps. She grabbed her chest with her right hand and bowed her head sadly. It seemed that she was suffocated by Jin Cheng Ao's words. At this moment, her ears slightly moved. "Do it." The decisive and cold voice instantly exploded in Fang Yuan's ears. Clang. Fang Yuan had no time to think and immediately stabbed Jin Cheng Ao's back with his sword. There was a sharp whistling sound. Jin Cheng Ao's pupils shrank and his whole body shook without thinking. A circle of sword light instantly appeared around him. Ding! When the long sword touched Jin Cheng Ao's back, it actually made a sound of gold and iron colliding. There were a few sparks. Protective sword energy. Fang Yuan didn't have time to be shocked by Jin Cheng Ao's strength. He immediately changed his body and stabbed Su Li with his sword. Jin Cheng Ao wouldn't allow Fang Yuan to mess around. He saw the flaw and grabbed Fang Yuan's wrist. Then he shook. "Let go." Under the great strength, Fang Yuan really couldn't hold the long sword. The weapon was taken away by Jin Cheng Ao. Jin Cheng Ao sneered and directly left. He disappeared at the corner of the tunnel in the blink of an eye. "Stop." Jin Cheng Ao was furious. When he was about to catch up, the long sword in his hand suddenly didn't listen to him. He subconsciously grasped the sword, but even his body was inexplicably sucked to Su Li puff. At this moment, blood burst out. Jin Cheng Ao stared blankly at the long sword in his hand inserted in Su Li's chest. His face was full of blood. How could this happen? Why can't the sword listen to me? Su Li was nailed to the wall and spat out a big mouthful of blood. Her pneuma instantly weakened and instantly became inaudible. At this moment, Yang Shixuan, Jin Zhentian, and others came to the dungeon together. They were all shocked on the spot. Time seemed to be frozen. They actually saw Jin Cheng Ao kill Su Li with a sword. "Bastard! How dare you kill her?" Yang Shixuan was completely angry. He shouted and rushed out instantly. He slapped Jin Cheng Ao's back with a big palm. When Jin Cheng Ao was distracted, Yang Shixuan knocked him out and was arrested by the officers and soldiers of the provincial office. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. Before Jin Zhentian reacted, it was over. Seeing that his son was dragged by 2 elite soldiers, he was immediately furious and wanted to stop them. But he was scared by Yang Shixuan's fierce eyes. Yang Shixuan arranged people to save Su Li from the wall. While he operated his martial arts to suppress Su Li's injury, he ordered, "Hurry up. Zai, go and invite the best doctor in the city." After doing all this, Yang Shixuan had time to look at Jin Zhentian, who was dull. He sneered and said, "Lord Jin, what your son committed is enough to be killed. You'd better think of the reason why your son killed workshop owner Su. Otherwise, even you can't escape the legal sanctions of the Dahan country." Seeing that Yang Shixuan took his son away, Jin Zhentian was so angry that he gnashed his teeth, but he didn't dare to act rashly. "Investigate. Investigate for me. My son will never do such a stupid thing." We must get to the bottom of this matter and prove Cheng Ao's innocence. The entire supervisory division was in chaos. Fang Yuan left the supervisory division in the chaos, but his heart was extremely complicated. Su Li, in order to deal with the Jin family, is it really worth it? When Yang Hongxiu saw Yang Shushuan holding Su Li, who was covered with blood, and ran into the mansion, Yang Hongxiu was so scared that she covered her mouth and couldn't think. Father, third brother, what happened? What happened to Su Li? She lost a lot of blood. Yang Hongxiu ran with Yang Zai in a panic. Yang Zai didn't have time to talk. He carried the old doctor who was panting beside him. He was afraid that the old doctor would faint before they got to the room. Prepare the hot water quickly. Don't shake her body. Lay flat. Steady. After a moment of chaos, the doctor felt Su Li's pulse with a tired face. He nodded slightly in the eyes of Yang Shushuan and others. Her life is saved. Phew, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, and Yang Shushuan was also afraid. If Su Li died tonight, the matter would be too serious. Not only the Jin family would be finished, but also the Yang family would be implicated. A workshop owner of a provincial embroidery workshop died with injustice. It was a major event that shook the country. However, workshop owner Su is also lucky. The doctor stroked his beard and sighed. Maybe at the moment of danger, she subconsciously dodged an inch, so that the sword cut the heart meridian just right and didn't hurt the root. Otherwise, she would have died on the way. How could she lie here? Hearing this, everyone couldn't help but be slightly stunned. Dodged all the heart meridian just right? His luck was truly indescribable. Yang Hongxiu squatted beside the bed and looked at Su Li, who was lying on the bed breathing smoothly. She couldn't help but show a reassuring smile. In her mind, although Su Li was not as powerful as the immortal master, she admired Su Li for her immersion in teaching and insolence when teaching her. This was the feeling between people of the same age. In other words, she had regarded Su Li as her idol. Although she still liked to oppose Su Li on the surface, she had been sincerely convinced by Su Li in her heart. If Su Li was suddenly killed by the people of the Jin family, she would really be sad for a lifetime. Fortunately, Su Li, you are lucky. You should get better soon and continue to teach me embroidery. The doctor and others left quietly. Yang Shushuan and Yang Zai had more things to do. Only Yang Hongxiu and Huan stayed in the room to accompany Su Li quietly. How is Su Li? As soon as Fang Yuan came back, he was surrounded by Chu Qingning and others. This dangerous move was truly frightening. If there was even the slightest mistake, they would lose their lives. Fang Yuan looked at the pairs of eyes staring at him and didn't want to tease them. He nodded and said, I went to the Yang mansion. Su Li is fine. That sword was controlled by herself, so she would naturally avoid the vital parts. Besides, with her cultivation, even if her heart meridian was pierced. Then Fang Yuan looked at Chu Qingning. Chu Qingning couldn't help but scratch his head and said with a hollow smile, the inborn realm can control every inch of the body. Even if the heart meridian was pierced, Su Li could close it in a short time. Her life would not be in danger. Haydn and others said oh and were greatly relieved. But Yin Xuetong and Fang Mu were shocked. Haydn and others didn't understand what the inborn realm was, but it didn't mean that they didn't understand. Su Li, is she in the inborn realm? Yin Xuetong couldn't help but pinch Chu Qingning. Chu Qingning screamed in pain and said, why did you pinch me? I just know it. If you don't believe it, you can ask Fang Yuan. Fang Mu couldn't help but say, but it is too incredible. Miss Su Li is 1 year younger than the eldest brother. She is in the inborn realm at the age of 16. She is a young master. It is said that, hush. Fang Yuan interrupted. Fang Mu came to his sense and almost said the taboo that couldn't be said. He was covered with a layer of cold sweat. What is the legend? Haydn and others couldn't help but surround them and said, bosses, why don't you continue? I heard that Boss Ling is also a young master. What is the relationship between this young master and the legend? Yes, bosses. You will be suffocated if you don't finish your words. Others couldn't help but jeer, but Fang Yuan and others kept it a secret and changed the topic. 3 days later, Su Li woke up. Looking at Yang Hongxiu, who was surprised by the bed, she couldn't help but smile on her pale face. In fact, she didn't faint at all. She had been meditating and healing herself in the past 3 days. If such a little pain could make her faint, she couldn't have held on for so many years before she was caught in the previous life. Su Li, you finally wake up. Yang Hongxiu said cheerfully, I will go to find my father. Su Li realized that she was in the satrap's mansion. It was a place that she never dared to set foot in the previous life. After a while, Yang Shushuan finally arrived. He caught Jin Cheng'ao, which meant that he fell out with the Jin family. He was very busy in the past 3 days. The Jin family held many industries in the Qinghe town and it was extremely difficult to deal with them. But he naturally wouldn't tell Su Li these. Workshop owner Su, I am relieved that you wake up. How do you feel? Chapter 102. Hearing that, Yang Shushuan was full of guilt and said, Workshop owner Su, you are exaggerating. In fact, it's all my fault. If I didn't let the Jin family mess around, there would be no such thing today. Fortunately, I saw the scene that Jin Cheng'ao attacked you with my own eyes. No matter how many reasons Jin Zhentian finds, his son can't get away with it. This time, I must act impartially and give justice to workshop owner. Su Li showed a gratified smile and nodded gently. I didn't expect that child Jin would suddenly kill me. This time, I almost passed by the gate of hell. It really makes Su Li feel scared. Since I'm fine, I won't bother you anymore. Satrap, please send me back to the school. Mammy is still waiting for me. Okay. Yang Shushuan promised, you have a personal mammy to take care of you. You will definitely recover faster than in my house. I'll send someone to send you back. After some arrangements, Satrap Yang watched the carriage leave and couldn't help but sigh. Workshop owner Su was about the same age as his daughter, but she was experienced in dealing with people. She didn't look like a naive girl at all. Besides, Hongxiu said that her embroidery skills were also top-notch. It was the first time for him to see such a genius. The world is so vast and full of strange things. Yang Shushuan sighed and turned back to the house. He continued to worry about the Jin family. Su Li returned to the courtyard of the school. Mammy Li looked at Su Li's pale face and shed tears. After helping Su Li lie down, she immediately went out to buy chicken, duck and fish. She was going to make soup for Su Li to nourish her body. When Ruomin, Feng Qingru and others received the news, but they didn't come to see Su Li at the first time. Instead, they chose to send tonics to let Su Li have a good rest for a period of time. It was not too late to bother Su Li when she was almost well. I didn't expect that such a thing happened. Fortunately, Su Li was lucky and was not killed by Jin Cheng'ao. When Ruomin calmed down and said to Gong Xiangjuan, who was lying in a coma on the bed. Gong Xiangjuan moved her eyes. It seemed that she wanted to open them, but she couldn't. Gong Minute smiled bitterly and said, Grandma Wen, don't work in vain. Grandma can hear you, but she can't open her eyes or speak. Many doctors in the city have come to take a look, but none of them can explain what happened. When Ruomin sighed deeply, this kind of strange disease is really rare. Fortunately, your grandma can still bear it. I will find another famous doctor. Unfortunately, the legendary great Dr. Qi has been missing for many years. Some people even say that he has passed away. If you can ask him for help, your grandmother will definitely be cured. Gong Minute immediately felt helpless. How could she meet that kind of genius doctor just because she wanted to? Even if she met him, he might not necessarily help her. The temperament of genius doctors was very strange. After Su Li returned to the courtyard, she didn't need to hide anymore. She immediately ran the Ghost Valley meditation direction to heal herself. The Ghost Valley meditation direction deserved to be the holy book of medicine. In less than 2 days, she felt that the wounds in her body were almost healed, leaving only superficial wounds. Of course, this was also related to her innate physique. If she was still in the acquired realm, she would need at least half a month to recuperate. After the injury was almost healed, Su Li returned to the Linli building and was immediately surrounded by Fang Yuan and others. How are your injuries? Fang Yuan stared at Su Li's pale face and couldn't help but care about her. It's no big deal. Su Li didn't seem to see the concern in Fang Yuan's eyes and replied lightly. Then she immediately asked about the situation of the Linli building these days. According to your instructions, I have divided the Osmanthus wine into 3 grades. When Yin Xuetong talked about the specific matters, she was full of confidence. She said, the first grade Osmanthus wine is the raw liquor with extremely high degree. Those who are weak will be drunk after 1 cup. This kind of wine is sold as a gimmick. I price a pot of 100,000 taels. The second grade Osmanthus wine is the liquor after being diluted 100 times. The price is 1,000 taels. The third grade Osmanthus wine is the one we sold before. The original price remains the same. Miss Su Li, what do you think? Su Li nodded gently and thought for a moment. She said, well done. How much profit has the winery made during this period? 245,000 taels. Yin Xuetong immediately replied, this is the pure profit. We have earned back all the cost of building the winery. Chu Qingning, Haydn, and others couldn't help but be speechless. It was too horrible to recover the cost in 1 month. Very good. Next, we should prepare for the expansion. Su Li glanced at the people present and said roughly. Then she pointed to Fang Yuan and said, Fang Yuan, you stay here. Others can leave. Chu Qingning smiled and secretly gave Fang Yuan a thumbs up. He took everyone out of the adytum. Fang Yuan was also nervous. When everyone left, he couldn't help but ask, what do you want me to do here? What do you think? Su Li smiled gently. Fang Yuan blushed and was slightly annoyed. He said, don't make fun of me. Okay. Su Li shrugged indifferently and said, the thing about Jin Chengao is not finished yet. You go to Yang Zai today. So, Fang Yuan's expression changed slightly. He didn't understand why Su Li was so persistent about the Jin family. Do you have to kill them all? Holding the secret letter in his hand, Fang Yuan looked up at the dim night. He thought of the lust in Jin Chengao's eyes that day. Finally, he did not hesitate to disappear into the night. In the dungeon of the provincial office, begging for mercy and roaring were heard day after day. In the past 2 days, the roaring was much louder than usual. Let me out. Why do you catch me? I said that I didn't kill Su Li at all. The sword hit it by itself. The burning anger in Jin Chengao's eyes had already made him lose his mind. As arrogant as he was, how could he bear the word prisoner? It was inconsistent with his identity and his state of mind. The jailer impatiently scratched his ear and couldn't help but say, First Master Jin, you'd better stop for a while. If you want to prove your innocence, you should think of a decent reason. The sword hit it by itself. Do you think everyone is a fool? It's really ridiculous. What I said is true. Jin Chengao roared madly, why don't you believe me? Ha 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 ha. After he said that, the jailer sneered, which made Jin Chengao angrier. He didn't understand why he was so angry, but he was angry. Once this kind of anger was generated, it couldn't be stopped. He couldn't calm down and think about the problem at all. He had already understood that he must have been tricked, but what scared him was that he couldn't control his emotions at all. At this time, the sound of the prison chain came into his ears. Jin Chengao sensitively raised his head and revealed a pair of scarlet eyes. Yang Zai, who came in, was shocked as if he was stared at by a beast. However, it didn't prevent him from completing the order of Mr. Li. Yang Zai showed a sarcastic smile and said, Jin Chengao, I didn't expect that you would be so arrogant. Aren't you proud? Today you are a prisoner. Let's see how you can be arrogant. Yang Zi Yi. Jin Chengao's face was distorted like a devil in hell. He was full of hatred. He struggled hard and the chains on his limbs suddenly rattled. He said, if you dare to say one more word, I will kill you. I'm really scared. Yang Zai looked indifferent and sat in front of Jin Chengao. He said, I'm sitting here. Come and kill me. You are cruel and worse than pigs and dogs. It's not enough to hurt workshop owner Su. Do you want to kill me in the provincial office? Yang Zai sneered and felt very happy. Mr. Li's order was to let him come to the dungeon to humiliate Jin Chengao. He wanted to do this kind of thing. In the martial arts competition last year, Jin Cheng-ao not only defeated him, but also humiliated him in front of everyone and broke one of his leg. If his father didn't spend a lot of money to buy the magical plaster from Yunjing, he would have been a useless person now. How could such hatred disappear just like that? Jin Cheng-ao struggled crazily. A layer of stone powder fell from the wall, but he still couldn't break free. Yang Zai, I will kill you. I will kill all of you. Yang Shishuan, Su Li, wait and see. Yang Zai was horrified. Was Jin Cheng-ao crazy? Why did he look abnormal? However, when he saw Jin Cheng-ao being so embarrassed, he felt more comfortable. He even felt that there was a sign of progress in his cultivation. Jin Cheng-ao, why are you still struggling? You intend to kill the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop in the provincial city. It's a big crime. Even your father can't save you. As long as my father reports to Yunjing, you will be executed immediately. There is no other end. Yang Zai's cruel words were like the tip of a knife stabbing into Jin Cheng-ao's heart. It made Jin Cheng-ao tremble all over. Then, a breath like a storm drowned Yang Zai. What is this? Jin Cheng-ao. Yang Zai was terrified. In his eyes, the wall suddenly cracked like a spiderweb, and then, boom, the whole dungeon seemed to have an earthquake. Large pieces of the wall that locked the chain fell. Yang Zai was hit carelessly and fainted directly. The dungeon was in chaos in an instant. Jin Cheng-ao saw the consequences caused by his bursting power. His eyes suddenly became clear. The effect of Su Li's medicine had passed. I broke through. The peak of the acquired realm. Jin Cheng-ao was ecstatic. Immediately, he saw Yang Zai, who was pressed under the stone and kept vomiting blood. His pupils shrank immediately. In addition to Yang Zai's life, he would definitely be executed by Yang Shishuan immediately. No. I want to escape. When I reach the inborn realm and come back, even Yang Shishuan can't control me. Thinking of this, Jin Cheng-ao jumped out of the stone wall. He wore a prisoner's uniform and quickly blended into the night. He fled to the wilderness. Feeling the harsh wind in his ears, Jin Cheng-ao was full of excitement. This is the peak of the acquired realm. When my AO sword skills are further improved, I can tie with the general warriors of the inborn realm without breaking through the inborn realm. Qinghe Province, Yang Shishuan. It won't take long for me to get back at you. Suddenly, a ray of light seemed to shoot from the sky. Before Jin Cheng-ao could react, it penetrated his chest and blasted a fist-sized hole in his chest. Jin Cheng-ao staggered and fell into the dust. He lost his heart and instantly died. His eyes were wide open. There was a little disbelief in his eyes. It seemed that he didn't expect that he would die in such an unknown way. Under the moonlight, Su Li with a pale face walked over with a long bow in her hand. She muttered to the corpse. In the previous life, you did carry forward the AO sword skills and became a senior at the peak of the inborn realm. You forced the daughter of the Yang family to marry. Yang Hongxiu was tortured to death by you. However, you were too arrogant. You offended too many people in the martial arts circle. Soon, you got into trouble. You died, at the age of 30. However, your AO sword skills soon had a successor. This successor was not someone else. He was the beggar who found the secret when he collected your corpse. Therefore, your name was left in the biography of the martial arts circle. Although you only lived for 30 years, you became a shining legend in the martial arts circle. In this life, Su Li said and gently put the bow next to the corpse. She split the sole of Jin Cheng-ao's shoe with a sword. I will accept your AO sword skills. A thin piece of paper fell from the inside of the sole to the ground. Chapter 103. When Su Li returned to the Linli building, the news that Jin Cheng-ao fled for fear of punishment had spread all over the city. It not only made the Yang family angry, but also caught the Jin family off guard. They never expected that Jin Cheng-ao would despise the laws of the Dahan country and escape from the prison. Moreover, he seriously injured the third child of the Yang family. It was said that the third child was dying. Such a change made Jin Zhentian realize that the Jin family and the Yang family had completely gone to the opposite side, and there was no room for turning back. Cheng Ao's martial arts talent is very strong. It doesn't matter if he escapes. Jin Zhentian looked up at the sky and sighed. He was not sure to deal with the attack of the Yang family. Although he was shocked and surprised that Jin Cheng Ao could escape from the prison, he was more happy and gratified. He knew that his son hid a secret from him, and it must be related to the martial arts circle. Jin Cheng Ao could break the prison of the satrap's mansion with bare hands, which meant that he had reached the peak of the acquired realm. As long as he could go further, no matter which country he goes to, the inborn senior will be respected. At that time, my son's mistake will be reduced to a small one. No one can do anything about it. The more Jin Zhentian thought, the more excited he was. But he didn't know that Jin Cheng Ao had become a pool of blood because of Su Li. At the same time, the satrap's mansion was filled with a faint anxiety. Yang Shushuan stood outside the door with a gloomy face. He watched the maids bring out basins of blood from the room, but he didn't see the doctor come out. Madame Yang and Yang Hongxiu stood aside with red eyes. This bastard. Why did he provoke Jin Cheng Ao? His life is in danger. Yang Shushuan couldn't help but scold. Mrs. Yang wiped her tears and said sadly, "Lord, at this time, why do you blame the third brother? God bless my son. He must be fine." Jin Cheng Ao. Yang Hongxiu's eyes were burning with hatred. She said, "If I knew that he would hurt the third brother, I should have killed him directly." After 2 consecutive shocks, Yang Hongxiu's resentment towards Jin Cheng Ao had reached the extreme. If Jin Cheng Ao hadn't disappeared, she would have rushed into the dungeon with a knife without saying a word. When the 3 of them were waiting anxiously, the sweating doctor finally came out of the room. Yang Shushuan and the other 2 immediately greeted him. "Dr. Lin, how's my son?" Dr. Lin looked at the 3 people's eager eyes, but he couldn't help sighing. "Your young master is not as lucky as workshop owner Su. His ribs were broken by the big stone, and one of them happened to pierce into his lungs." "I'm afraid." "What?" Yang Shushuan and the other 2 felt as if they had been struck by lightning, and their faces instantly turned pale. "Zai!" Lady Yang let out a sorrowful cry. Her eyes rolled back and she fainted. The maidservants were in a flurry. Dr. Lin quickly went forward and pinched her philtrum. Not long after, Lady Yang regained consciousness, but her face was full of tears and she could no longer speak. "Lord Yang, there's nothing I can do. It's better to prepare for the young master as soon as possible." Dr. Lin sighed, as if he was too ashamed to stay here any longer. He picked up the medicine box and left in a hurry. Walking into the room, Yang Shushuan stood in front of the window and looked at Yang Zai, who was lying on the bed like a piece of golden paper. Yang Shushuan pursed his lips and felt his hands and feet go cold. In his life, he had experienced all kinds of despair, but none had been as heart-wrenching and bone-chilling as this one. It happened so suddenly that it was too late for Qing Ni and others to come back to see Zai for the last time. Is there really no other way? Yang Shushuan clenched his fists and made a cracking sound. Tap, tap, tap. Yang Hongxiu walked in step by step. She leaned against the bed and stared at Yang Zai blankly. Tears flowed out of her red and swollen eyes. She carefully held Yang Zai's cold hands and whispered with trembling lips, "Third brother, don't you like Hongxiu the most? Open your eyes quickly and look at me. Thanks to you, my archery has improved a lot recently." Suddenly, Yang Hongxiu seemed to think of something. She was slightly startled and immediately let go of Zai's hands. She turned around and grabbed Yang Shushuan's sleeves. "Father, I have a way. Go and find the immortal master. She must have a way to save the third brother. Father, go with me to find the immortal master." Yang Shushuan was shocked by Yang Hongxiu's sudden madness. After hearing his daughter's words, he looked more confused. Immortal master? Who was that? Was it possible that Hongxiu became his disciple? That was too reckless. Why didn't she mention it to him? "Father, don't hesitate anymore." Seeing that her father didn't move, Yang Hongxiu suddenly broke down and said, "The immortal master also knows the third brother. She is such a powerful person. She will definitely help him." Yang Shushuan was awakened by Yang Hongxiu. He immediately held her hands and said, "Okay. There's no time to lose. Lead the way to that otherworldly expert immediately." He could already imagine that the so-called master of Yang Hongxiu must be an immortal senior. Such a person might really have a way. No, no, no. She is in the Linli building. She is the boss of the Linli building. Yang Hongxiu was so anxious that she burst into tears and said, "The immortal master said that I can't tell others about the relationship. I have violated the agreement and can't take more people there. Father, let me go with you to find her." The boss of the Linli building? Yang Shushuan was even more surprised. If he remembered correctly, the boss of the Linli building was a young woman. Although she never showed up, he knew that the woman was definitely younger than him from her figure. Could she help to cure Zai's injury? Yang Shushuan was deeply doubtful, but there was no other way. He didn't hesitate too much and immediately took Yang Hongxiu to go to the Linli building for help. But before they went out of the yard, a servant came to report, "Master, the boss of the Linli building came to visit. She said that she had something important to discuss with you." She actually came by herself. Yang Sheshuan's hurried expression was slightly stagnant. He immediately said, "Invite her in. The immortal master is coming." Yang Hongxiu turned from sadness to joy. Since she saw Su Li's magical means, she had a blind confidence in Su Li. After a short while, Su Li dressed as Ms. Li came to the yard. When she saw Yang Sheshuan, she bowed slightly and said quickly, "Satrap Yang, I take the liberty to visit you. Please forgive me. I heard that the third master of the Linli building was seriously injured and the doctors were helpless. I have a relationship with the third master of the Linli building. Can I have a try?" Su Li directly told the purpose of her visit. Yang Sheshuan was immediately happy and said quickly, "Come on, Ms. Li, please come in. My son is in danger. I won't be polite. If my son can survive, I will repay you." Su Li was a little surprised. She looked at Yang Hongxiu, who was avoiding her eyes. She immediately understood that the relationship between her and the brother and sister of the Yang family had been exposed. She didn't say anything and stepped into the room. Yang Shushuan immediately followed her. Seeing Yang Zai lying on the bed, Su Li sighed in her heart. She just let Yang Zai stimulate the last power of the medicine in Jin Cheng'ao's body and let him break the chain and escape. But she didn't expect that Jin Cheng'ao directly broke through to the peak of the acquired realm. Yang Zai almost died because of her. Although she was reborn and her medical circle and poison circle had reached the sublime realm, she was not a god. Naturally, she couldn't calculate all the possibilities in the world. Fortunately, Yang Zai's injury was not serious in her eyes. This mistake could be corrected. "Ms. Li, how is my son? Can he be saved?" Seeing that Su Li didn't speak for a long time, Yang Shushuan couldn't help but ask. Su Li came to her sense and nodded slightly. She said softly, "Lord Yang, please be at ease. Your son broke 3 ribs and hurt his lungs. It is impossible for ordinary people. Fortunately, your son has practiced a little Shengong and can hold on. I know a little about medical circle. This injury can be cured." "That's good." Yang Shushuan breathed a long sigh of relief. Then he immediately realized something and exclaimed, "Shengong? Zai has practiced Shengong. I didn't. If it is convenient for Lord Yang, please leave. I am going to perform acupuncture. I can't be disturbed by others." Su Li interrupted Yang Shushuan faintly. Yang Shushuan woke up and apologized. He left the room without saying anything. He was afraid that his son would be disturbed by Su Li. Back to the door, Yang Shushuan still frowned. No matter how he thought, he couldn't understand how his son secretly learned his Shengong. He didn't leave any book record and didn't pass it on to anyone. That Shengong was a secret that couldn't be mentioned to anyone. Ms. Li also knows Shengong. Could it be? Various speculations appeared in Yang Shushuan's mind. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of Yang Hongxiu, who was leaning on the window and peeping. He immediately covered Yang Hongxiu's mouth and carried her down from the window. After walking far away, he asked, "Xiu, do you know anything about the background of your master?" Yang Hongxiu was relieved when her father put her down. She rolled her eyes and said, "Dad, you really scared me. I don't know the background of the immortal master. Besides, she only promised to teach me archery. She didn't let me worship her as a master. It's good that you didn't worship her as a master. Yang Shishuan breathed a sigh of relief. There were many rules in the martial arts circle. A teacher for a day was a father for a lifetime. If Hongxiu really worshipped her as a master, the relationship between the Yang family and Ms. Li would be too close. However, I heard from the third brother that the immortal master is a great senior. Yang Hongxiu proudly counted her fingers and said, I remember that she is called inborn senior. Although I don't know what it means, the immortal master is really powerful. She can shoot through the target at once. Well, she's really powerful. Yang Shishuan was still absent-minded. He gradually recalled the whole sentence of Yang Hongxiu. His heart couldn't stop beating. He couldn't help but grab Yang Hongxiu's shoulder. He stared at her and confirmed again, Xiu, what did you say? Inborn senior? Are you sure you didn't hear it wrong? Dad, you hurt me. Yang Hongxiu struggled for a while and said angrily, I am not deaf. The third brother repeated it to me many times. How could I hear it wrong? Yang Shishuan was stunned. He thought that he was just a few feet away from Su Li. What they said before might have been heard by her. His face immediately darkened. This bastard has grown up. He not only learned Shengong secretly but also got acquainted with an inborn senior quietly. He didn't tell me about these things. When he recovers, I will beat him to the point that he can't get down. How dare he? Chapter 104. Squeak. The door was gently pushed open. Su Li poked her head out, but she didn't see Yang Shishuan and Yang Hongxiu. She couldn't help but feel strange. She was concentrating on treating Yang Zai just now. How could she have time to listen to Yang Shishuan's words? Miss. At this time, Mrs. Yang hurried in. She couldn't help but be stunned when she saw Su Li. Then she quickly quickened her pace and walked to Su Li. She asked eagerly, How is Zai? Can I go in and have a look? She was told by the maids that a young doctor volunteered to treat Yang Zai. She immediately ignored the advice of the maids. She directly got up from the bed and ran to Yang Zai despite her dizziness. Her heart sank when she saw Su Li. Although Su Li wore a veil, she could see at a glance that Su Li was not old. How could such a young girl have such high medical skills? Su Li looked at Mrs. Yang with a gentle smile on her face. She said, Your child is fine. It is estimated that he will wake up in a few hours. Please go in and sit down and wait. Okay. Mrs. Yang didn't believe Su Li's words at all. She answered perfunctorily and walked in with red eyes. Su Li was not angry. She tidied up her clothes and left the Yang mansion with the medicine box without disturbing anyone. Mrs. Yang walked into the room and was surprised to see Yang Zai on the bed. She clearly remembered that Zai's face was as white as a piece of paper before, but now it was very ruddy. It seemed that Zai was not in a coma but sleeping. Could it be that the lady just now really has some ability? Mrs. Yang's eyes were faintly shaken. At this time, Yang Zai snorted. Mrs. Yang immediately looked up and saw that Yang Zai's eyelashes trembled and he opened his eyes. Yi, you wake up. Mrs. Yang was overjoyed. She immediately ran out to inform Yang Shishuan, Master, Zai woke up. He woke up. Yang Zai looked at the top of the bed. His eyes were blank. Where am I? Yes, I stimulated Jin Cheng Ao in the dungeon. Unexpectedly, his Shengong broke through and collapsed the dungeon. I am still alive. Yang Zai raised his hand and found that it was not as weak as he imagined. But his chest was still aching. My injuries. Yang Zai touched his chest with a look of surprise. The moment he was hit, he knew that he was done for. He would either die or be seriously injured and become a cripple. But the pain in his body told him that his injury was not serious. He would probably be full of vigor after recuperating for half a month. Zai. Yang Shishuan's voice came from the door. The back door was opened. Yang Hongxiu and Mrs. Yang also arrived. Father. Yang Zai looked ashamed and said, I was wrong. I didn't expect that Jin Cheng Ao almost broke through the peak of the acquired realm. I just scolded him a little. You. Yang Shushuan was so angry that he didn't know what to say. This brat had just crawled back from the gates of hell. Could it be that he could give him a heavier punishment? Forget it, forget it. I'll let this matter go. If Mr. Li didn't come in time, you would have been dead already. Yang Shushuan snorted coldly, flicked his sleeves and left. Lady Yang, on the other hand, was beaming with joy. The old master really had a sharp tongue but a soft heart. He was already so anxious earlier, but now he was still pretending to be calm. Did Mr. Li come? Yang Zai was stunned and immediately smiled bitterly. He said, "No wonder. I knew that my injury was not so light. The immortal master came by himself." Yang Hongxiu said with a smile, "It seems that the third brother has a high position in Mr. Li's mind. I just begged you to find the immortal master. I didn't expect that the immortal master had already arrived. Fortunately, the girl was a miraculous doctor and saved your life. You should thank her." Lady Yang said with a serious face, "Do you know that when Dr. Lin asked us to prepare for your funeral, my heart was almost broken. Don't mess around in the future. Your life is the most important." Facing his mother's warning, Yang Zai felt guilty and scared. He said, "Mother, don't worry. I will do what I can in the future. Tell me in detail. How did you know Mr. Li?" Yang Shushuan saw that his son was in good spirits and couldn't help asking. "It was in the prisoner camp." Yang Zai remembered the scene on that day and immediately said. After Su Li returned to the Linli building, her days returned to peace. After the incident of Jin Cheng Ao, the contradiction between the Yang family and the Jin family was public. The Jin family didn't dare to be as arrogant as before. Everything was as usual in the Linli building and the embroidery workshop. No one deliberately made trouble. Su Li didn't need to take care of the courses in the school because of her injury. Therefore, Su Li stayed in the Linli building these days and asked Fang Yuan to find a craftsman to build a set of distillation equipment mentioned by her husband in the previous life. "Su Li, what are you building this thing for? It looks weird." Chu Qingning ran over and looked at the huge thing in the underground additum. Two barrel-shaped things were connected by long pipes. He didn't know what they were used for. "Of course, it is used to make wine." Su Li smiled slightly and answered simply without explaining. "This?" Chu Qingning was confused and asked, "It can make wine? You will know when the new wine comes out. I will teach you how to use it." Su Li checked the equipment and confirmed that it was well sealed. Then she turned around and began to prepare the rice wine. "Sister Li, isn't this ordinary rice wine? I think it can be sold in the market." Fang Ling helped Su Li and complained, "If this kind of wine is sold in our store, it will lower the level of our store." "Ling, don't talk nonsense. Su Li must have a special way." Yin Shuatong glanced at Su Li, who was busy and didn't speak, and reminded her in a low voice. Fang Ling stuck out her tongue and didn't speak immediately. After the rice was fermented, Su Li wiped her face and said with a smile, "You will know when the rice wine is brewed. Ling, you should follow my steps these days and brew more and store it in the warehouse. Remember to mark the date." "Okay." Fang Ling nodded hurriedly. She always carried out Su Li's orders unconditionally. "Shuetong, you might as well announce the news of the new wine. I think these wines will be on the market in a few days." Yin Shuetong heard Su Li's words and nodded slightly. Then he couldn't help but ask, "What is our new wine?" "I'm afraid that it will not have a big impact if we just say it vaguely." Su Li tilted her head and thought for a while. Then she said, "Just add one word." After that, she wrote a word on the ground with a little water. Then she turned around and left without saying anything. Yin Shuetong looked at the word on the ground and looked more confused. "Strong? What kind of wine is it? It seems that there is no strong wine in Dahan country." After dealing with the chores, Su Li returned to the top floor and opened the window to look at the direction of the satrap's mansion. She was waiting for someone. With her movement technique, she could heal Yang Zai's injuries without anyone noticing, and then leave quietly. But she chose to go above board. In this way, the news that Ms. Li was a medical master would be spread to Wen Ruomin soon. Gong Xiangjuan hadn't heard from her for half a month. She didn't believe that when Ruomin wouldn't come to her after the news that Yang Zai was seriously injured was spread. This time, I just want to return Feng Qingru's favor. If not, I don't need to be so troublesome. Su Li sighed in her heart and showed a complex expression. But the favor was the most difficult to return. She wanted Feng Qingru to be the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop according to the track of her previous life and let her live without regret. If he could do that, then he would be able to repay her favor. Su Li thought in her heart. But in the next 7 days, she waited for a long time and didn't see anyone visit the Linli building, which made her feel uneasy. Did something happen to Gong Xiangjuan? Or Gong Xiangjuan was dead? Su Li's eyes were slightly gloomy and she turned to go downstairs. Less than an hour later, she had restored her original identity and appeared in the courtyard of the school. Go to see Dean Gong. I haven't heard from her for a long time. I'm worried. When Su Li walked out of the door, Xiaowu and Thatian, who had been worried for many days, were happy. They immediately hesitated and said, Lord, your injury, it doesn't matter. Su Li smiled and shook her head. She said, I have been recuperating for many days. Although I can't take the carriage for a long time, it is not a problem for me to travel such a short distance. Since you said so, Lord. Xiaowu gritted his teeth and led a carefully modified carriage. The carriage was covered with layers of flannels, which greatly reduced the vibration. This is a little gift from Thatian and me, hehe. Xiaowu scratched his head and blushed. He smiled embarrassedly. Su Li was stunned and immediately showed a gentle smile. She said, thank you. Let's go. Okay. Xiaowu and Thatian immediately jumped on the carriage and gently whipped the horse's buttocks. The carriage immediately drove into the forest. Noticing that Xiaowu deliberately slowed down the speed, Su Li was more silent. A strange feeling rose from the bottom of her heart. In the previous life, she was used to deception. No matter who she faced, she was always very vigilant. She was afraid that she had no luck to enjoy the simple enthusiasm of Xiaowu and Thatian. Xiaowu, which village did you say you came from? When Xiaowu heard Su Li's question, he immediately laughed and said, Lord, Thatian and I are both from a small fishing village by the river outside the Qinghe town. It is very remote and the villagers are not rich. Both of us are orphans who grew up there. We can't read a few words. Sorry to make you laugh at us. When Su Li heard that, she slightly pursed her mouth and immediately said, I'm quite curious after hearing what you said. If you are free, why don't you take me to your village to have a look? Xiaowu was overjoyed when he heard that. That's great. If we can go back with you, we can return to our hometown in glory. Speaking of which, we haven't seen the village head for many years. Speaking of this, Xiaowu suddenly felt that it was inappropriate. He hesitated and said, Lord, I'm afraid not. I'm afraid that it's not safe for you to go there with your appearance. Don't worry. I'll take guards with me. Su Li dispelled Xiaowu's doubts. Thatian grinned from ear to ear. It was great to take the opportunity to go back and have a look. With the protection of guards, they didn't have to worry about being robbed by thieves. Su Li sat in the carriage and her eyes were gloomy. The idea of going to Xiaowu's hometown to have a look just emerged in her mind. If these two people were willing, it would be better to give them a good fortune. However, everything had not been decided yet. She had to go to the small fishing village to make a decision. Lord, we have arrived at the courtyard of Dean Gong. Xiaowu's voice came. Su Li walked out of the carriage and approached the courtyard. She immediately frowned. In addition to the numas of Gong Minute, Gong Xiangjuan, Wen Ruomin and Feng Qingru, there were others. When the maids at the door saw Su Li coming, they immediately saluted. They knew the relationship between Su Li and Gong Xiangjuan, so they immediately took Su Li into the courtyard without informing her. After Su Li followed them across a courtyard gate, the vague voice in the courtyard suddenly became clear. Chapter 105. Inside the room, it was still the same as last time. However, Gong Xiangjuan was not in front of the desk, but lying on the bed. Feng Qingru and Gong Minute sat on one side respectively. Wen Ruomin sat on the armchair beside the bed. The three of them glared at the plump woman standing in the room. Second mother, it was you who made grandma go away. Now you want her to go back with illness. Gong Minute was not as gentle as before. Her eyes were full of resentment and hatred. She said, I want to ask you. What is your intention? The plump woman was Wu Yun, the second madam of the Gong family. When Ruomin sat aside and breathed quickly. She was not a member of the Gong family, so it was not appropriate for her to intervene in this matter. But if Wu Yun really wanted to take away Gong Minute and Gong Xiangjuan forcibly, she would never sit idly by. Wu Yun seemed to be touched by Gong Minute. She looked slightly annoyed, but she returned to normal in an instant. She even said with a little apology, Minute. You also know that I was young and aggressive at that time. It was all the consequences of impulsiveness. Now I know that I was wrong. Can't you forgive me? Gong Min's eyes were very cold, as if she did not see the apology on Wu Yun's face. She said, some things are wrong. If you admit your mistake now, can you save my mother's life? Wu Yun's tail seemed to be stepped on by a cat. She was angry and screamed, Gong Minute, I didn't kill your mother. How many times do you want me to say that before you believe it? I will never believe it. Gong Minute leaned over the bed and said resolutely and crisply, go away. As long as you are still in that home, Grandma and I will never go back. Wu Yun stopped breathing. The hypocritical expression on her face was like a piece of paper being torn. Her expression was slightly distorted. When Ruomin saw that the situation was not good, she immediately stood up and shouted coldly, Wu Yun, this is not the Wu Mansion or the Gong Mansion. What do you want to do? Believe it or not, I will call someone to drive you out. Wu Yun stopped and her chest trembled with anger. She said, good, 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 very good, Gong Minute, you are very good. Let's forget about today. Since I have come to Qinghe town, don't think that I will give up so easily. Let's wait and see. Wu Yun glared at Gong Xiangjuan on the bed and immediately left. She glanced at Su Li in front of the door and snorted coldly. She warned, if anyone comes to see the old lady of the Gong family after today, don't blame me for being merciless. Su Li smiled gently and walked in without looking at Wu Yun. Wu Yunfeng's eyes widened in anger, and her face turned pale. She didn't mind the Gong family. But how could a little student of the Qinghe girls' school despise her? How preposterous. All of you, just you wait. Wu Yun roared madly and left the courtyard with her people. The remaining 3 people all smiled and felt that this scene was really refreshing. Su Li, why are you here? How are your injuries? Gong Minute forced a smile as she wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes. Su Li shook her head and smiled warmly, it's no big deal. I heard that Dean Gong also fell ill. I feel better these days, so I come to see her. By the way, just now. When Ruomin sighed and shook her head, little girl Su, you shouldn't get involved in this. That woman is not easy to deal with, but she married into the Gong family in Yunjing. Now the backyard of the Gong family belongs to her. Even Dean Gong was driven out by her. The Gong family in Yunjing? Su Li said in surprise. She was really surprised. In the previous life, she had no contact with Gong Xiangjuan. How could she know her specific origin? Yes, the Gong family is a big family in Yunjing. When Ruomin explained in detail, the big families in Yunjing are inextricably linked with the imperial court. You can't offend them. You have offended Wu Yun just now. She will definitely hold a grudge and make trouble for you in the future. Even the Qinghe girls' school can't help you. When Ruomin said helplessly, Gong Minute and Feng Qingru were even more depressed. Seeing this, Su Li immediately comforted her. Dean Wen, you don't have to think so far. I turned misfortune into blessing this time. My luck is not bad. Don't worry about me. The most urgent thing is the illness of Dean Gong. I heard from the mammy that the 3rd son of the satrap was almost killed by Jin Cheng Ao, but he was saved later. Why don't we try our luck? That's what I want to do. When Ruomin's eyes brightened when she heard Su Li's words. She said, although the satrap doesn't seem to want to say more for fear of offending that person. I learned from the servants in their mansion that the mysterious boss of the Leanly building cured the 3rd son of the Yang family. I intend to send someone to invite him, But I have been harassed by Wu Yun all day these days. I can't get away. I see. Su Li suddenly understood and then suggested, if you don't mind, Dean Wen, why don't you write a letter? I happen to go back to the courtyard on the way. Let Xiaowu take the letter to avoid being noticed by Wu Yun. That's great. Wen Ruomin immediately got up and walked to the desk. She wrote a letter quickly and gave it to Su Li. She said, thank you. You should be careful. Okay. Without much delay, Su Li went back to the Linli building on the grounds that she was not feeling well. She handed the letter to Xiaowu. Xiaowu naturally went to the Linli building without stopping. Su Li arranged a contingency in the Linli building. Xiaowu quickly got the reply and rushed back to Gong Shangjuan's courtyard. When Ruomin saw that Xiaowu was so efficient and praised him in her heart, she immediately opened the reply letter. Thank you for your kindness. I will visit you tonight and treat the Dean Gong. When Ruomin was overjoyed after reading the short sentence, she said, he agreed. Mr. Li is really merciful. He agreed immediately. Gong Minute stayed at the bedside and couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. It was rumored that Mr. Li was mysterious and had superb medical skills. Even if he couldn't completely cure her grandma, he could tell what disease her grandma had. Su Li returned to the Linli building from the courtyard and took the medicine box hidden in the underground additum. Then she dressed up as Mr. Li and came to the gate of the school. It was getting dark. There were already people waiting at the gate of the school. Seeing Su Li's iconic white dress, two people immediately greeted her and said respectfully, "Are you Mr. Li?" Su Li nodded slightly. The two people were overjoyed and immediately let Su Li get on the carriage. Then they drove all the way to Gong Shangjuan's courtyard. There was no accident on the way. Su Li returned to Gong Shangjuan's courtyard. Her humor and expression had changed, so people who were familiar with her couldn't see any clue. "Mr. Li, you finally come." When Ruomin stood in front of the door and saw that Mr. Li was a young woman, she was slightly surprised, but she quickly reacted and came out to greet Mr. Li calmly. Su Li smiled gently and said in a strange tone, "Dean Wen, you don't have to be so polite. It's not too late. I will go in and treat Dean Gong." Seeing that Su Li was so straightforward, Wen Ruomin was also relieved. She had no time to doubt Su Li's medical skills. Then she stepped aside to let Su Li go in. "Hello, Mr. Li." When Gong Minute saw Su Li in white with a veil on her face come in, she was stunned. But she reacted quickly and immediately gave way to Su Li so that Su Li could feel Gong Shangjuan's pulse. At this time, it was meaningless to doubt Su Li. It was better to let Su Li diagnose and see the result. Su Li felt Gong Shangjuan's pulse and immediately frowned. Her inference was right. In the previous life, Gong Shangjuan was poisoned to death. But in this life, she was affected by Su Li and showed symptoms in advance. Su Li thought and slowly let go of her hand to feel the pulse. Gong Minute, who was worried, waited for a moment and finally couldn't help asking, "Mr. Li, what disease does my grandma have?" "Do you have?" "Miss Gong, calm down. Let me ask you a few questions." Su Li raised her hand to stop Gong Minute from asking more questions. She asked, "Who is responsible for Dean Gong's daily food and drink?" Gong Min's face turned pale and she said, "Mr. Li, you mean, yes." Su Li nodded slightly and said, "Dean Gong is not sick, but poisoned." As soon as Su Li said that, the three people present all turned pale with horror. Even Gong Shangjuan's eyes moved violently. Dean Gong didn't offend anyone. How could she be poisoned? When Ruomin suddenly thought of something and her face immediately became gloomy. "It seems that Dean Wen has gained something." Su Li sighed softly and said, "A few days ago, the lecturer of your school, Su Li, was arrested, which coincided with the time when Dean Gong fell ill. Don't you have any ideas?" "The Jin family." When Ruomin looked pale. She didn't expect that the Jin family was so crazy that they even dared to kill Gong Shangjuan for an embroidery workshop. Weren't they afraid that the Gong family would get even with them? Su Li said at this time, in fact, the Jin family had a sense of propriety. But they didn't expect that there was hidden poison in Dean Gong's body for many years. The toxicity of the new poison was not strong, but it triggered the outbreak of the hidden poison. That made Dean Gong fall into the current strange symptoms. Every sentence of Su Li's analysis was like reeling silk from cocoons, which made everyone understand. You mean? When Ruomin's tone became more and more difficult, there was poison in Dean Gong's body. Gongmin's face was pale and she breathed quickly. She seemed to think of something and the flickering light in her eyes became darker. Su Li glanced at Gongmin and immediately nodded and said, "Yes. This kind of hidden poison needs the poisoner to be very patient. The poisoner has been poisoned for many years to have an effect. Once it accumulates to a certain extent, it will immediately break out and kill people. It looks like a sudden death. The reason can't be found at all." When Ruomin's hands and feet were cold when she heard it. She looked at Gong Xiangjuan, who couldn't move on the bed and felt scared. In this way, the poison of the Jin family saved her elder sister's life. If the poison hadn't been drawn out in advance and Mr. Li came to see it, the elder sister would have died suddenly. Hearing the word "died suddenly," Gongmin tightly grasped the bed sheet. Her face was as pale as snow and even her lips were pale. Feng Qingru noticed something strange and immediately held Gongmin for fear that she would fall down. Seeing such a reaction, it was not difficult for Su Li to guess that Gongmin's mother might have died suddenly. It was likely that the person who poisoned Gong Xiangjuan was the same person. If both Gongmin's mother and Gong Xiangjuan died, who could get benefits? She didn't need to think to know that it was Wu Yun during the day. It turns out that people surnamed Wu are all bad. Thinking of this, Su Li showed a cold smile at the corner of her mouth. "Mr. Li, can Grandma be saved?" Gongmin's face was pale and she reluctantly asked. She looked at Su Li eagerly with fear in her eyes. She was afraid that Su Li would shake her head. "Of course, she can be saved." Su Li gently stroked Gongmin's head and transferred a trace of vital energy to her, which made Gongmin's face slightly ruddy. "If the hidden poison accumulates enough and breaks out, it may be too late for me to save her. But the current situation is not difficult for me. If Miss Gong trusts me, it is better to send Dean Gong to the Linli building. Detoxification is not a day's work. The poison will even change at any time in the process of detoxification. It is obviously more convenient to send her to me." Gongmin's eyes immediately lit up when she heard this. She said, "Mr. Li, please let me go with Grandma. I will pay the full medical expenses. I can also work for the winery." Su Li smiled slightly and was about to agree. Suddenly, she looked cold. Gongmin was at a loss. Suddenly, she saw several cold arrows shot from the beam in the night sky. The targets were Su Li and Gong Xiangjuan, who was lying on the bed. "Be careful. Behind." Seeing this scene, Feng Qingru and Gongmin looked shocked and shouted to remind. When Ruomin and Su Li also turned their backs, but they were still at a loss and didn't know what happened. At the moment when Feng Qingru and Gongmin closed their eyes in fear. Ding, 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 ding. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.